You're live.
Well, kia ora koutou, and welcome to the Invercargill City Council Plan Change 2, which is a housing and code of practice plan change. So I'm going to open the hearing with the karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina te uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I he aki ana te atakura, te tio, he huka, he hou, tihe, moodi ora. And now I'm going to turn to Mr. Morris, who's going to cover off any health and safety and facilities and housekeeping matters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the event, so let's start with toilets because it's probably most appropriate and important for everybody. They are just out on the foyer on the first floor, male and female. Kitchen is through the door. You can see the exit sign to your left. There is a kitchen there. There is tea, coffee facilities. Lunch will be served downstairs in the drawing room. In the event of a fire evacuation, follow staff. The assembly area is outside in the car park, heading to the SIT campus, formerly St John's Church, for those of you who have been in the city for a little while. In the event of an earthquake, you all know, drop, cover, hold, and then follow the directions of the staff. And having been here in an earthquake, she's an old building, she does move on the first floor. So just a heads up on that one. And other than that, Madam Chair, there isn't anything else that we need to cover off.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So for the record, my name is Megan Mackay and I'm a lawyer and independent hearings commissioner based in Lincoln, Canterbury, which is in the takiwā of Taumetu Runanga, and I've been appointed to be the chair of this hearing. And I'll ask the panel members to also introduce themselves now, and I will just start at this end.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Not quite going. Decisions, RMA Commissioner.
Good morning, I'm Trish Boyle. I'm also a second term councillor and recertificated Making Good Decisions RMA Commissioner.
Morena Koto, Darren Ludlow, 9th term councillor and accredited commissioner with the chair's endorsement.
Well, thank you, and together we've been appointed to hear the submissions and make a decision on Plan Change 2. And I want to acknowledge the Council's staff and advisors who are present here today, including the reporting officer and legal counsel, experts, hearing administration team. So thank you to everybody who has prepared the material and made time to participate. We'll be asking legal counsel to introduce experts shortly. And however, before we introduce experts, I thought I would just point out to everybody and introduce Ms. Kat Manera, which is over our hearing administrator. Any materials that you want to share with us today or any changes to the timetable or any issues, please see Kat and she will communicate with us. And Mr. Morris, would you be staying or did you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Kia ora. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Michael Morris, Manager of Governance and Legal and also Legal Counsel in-house at the City Council. But no, I just help coordinate these hearings, but no, I'm not staying. I have an attendance in the District Court shortly.
Oh, good luck.
But I wish you all the very best for this. It's an exciting plan change.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Thorne, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Kia ora koutou, ko Lisa Thorne toku ingoa. I'm a planning consultant with Taylor Planning. I also have accreditation with Making Good Decisions. My role here today is to support the hearing panel as their RMA panel advisor.
So Plan Change 2 has two broad matters that we're considering. The first is to enable greater density and diversity in housing choice in the Residential 1 and Residential 1A zone. Second is updating how the district plan refers to the council's code of practice for subdivision, land use and development. We will not be making any decisions today. After the hearing, the panel will deliberate and make its decisions. We'll take into account all of the written material, the evidence, everything that we've heard today and any further information that's provided through directions. So I wanted just to take the time and share with everybody that the panel does come to this hearing with open mind, and we have plenty of questions to help us understand and test the material before us today. but those questions should not indicate any view that we're taking. Now, with the timetable, you will see the order of speakers, and we have about an hour and 15 minutes with council experts. And if things run over, because we do have plenty of questions, they're not overly complicated. They really are just to engage and test the material before us. But if we do run over, then we'll just manage it throughout the day. We are expected to end about 1 p.m, and that might run slightly over, and I think that's fine. There just needs to be a level of flexibility. So once we have heard from council evidence, we'll move into submitters, and then after that we'll return to the Section 42A officer for and final legal response. In terms of the written material, we have read all of the written material, so speakers do not need to read that word for word, and instead we invite everybody to focus on the key points that they want the panel to understand, and then after each speaker we'll ask questions. And the very first question I have for everybody today is, before we get underway, I just want to know if there's any procedural matters that anybody would like to raise, which might include timing, attendance, participation, order of appearance, or anything in particular. Conflicts of interest?
One. I think I should declare that Environment Southland are a submitter, and my wife is an elected member of Environment Southland, but she's also a hearings commissioner, so understands why I've discussed none of this with her.
Thank you. And we have talked about that as a panel as well, and we felt that we're quite comfortable with that. So now I am going to invite legal counsel to open the council's case. There's only one thing I wanted to say before that, which is as we move through the expert evidence today and our questions, if anybody doesn't know the answer to the questions and they need a little bit more time, we're really quite comfortable with that. We talked about this as a panel last night, and we said if we ask a question that can't be answered in the hearing, then we're quite comfortable for you to take a couple of days and share it with us via email. Anything that you do share will also be shared publicly on the website with all of the participating in the hearing. Okay, so with that in mind, we invite you, Mr. Garbutt, to open, and we have read all of your legal submissions, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou. My name's Michael Garbutt. I'm legal counsel engaged by Invercargill City Council in relation to this plan change. Just so you're aware of the program, we have 4 witnesses who will present to you. You've pre-read or had provided their evidence, so they're here to provide a short summary and response to some of the key issues and obviously answer your questions. I'll just tell so that you're aware who they are as I begin.
Shannon Baxter.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Emma Spalding, the Section 42A officer.
Rob Hayes, I'm the Engineering Services Manager at Invercargill City Council.
Online we have Tim Church. Tim, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, kia ora koutou. I'm Tim Church, urban design expert on behalf of Council.
And I might just ask you to turn your camera off and we'll get you back on when it's your turn, because you're booming into the room here. Thank you. Yes, so I've pre-circulated a set of legal submissions highlighting some of the points I wanted to raise with you. And there's a couple of points I'll just emphasise and just turn the page on those. I certainly don't plan to read them. I'm obviously open to answering questions at any stage. The first topic I've addressed is the legal framework, and I've set that out in paras 2 through 6. That's reasonably standard. I'm sure you've come across that, and they're all picked up and addressed by the Section 42A officer. I don't plan to labour that unless there's questions on that. The first specific issue I wanted to raise with you is around scope, and the 42A officer, Ms Spalding, has identified 4 submissions that she considered out of scope, and she checked that with me, and it was my confirmed view that I shared her view that they were out of scope for the reasons that we've set out, and I've provided for you in reasonably fulsome terms the law on scope in terms of what the law requires you to determine whether submissions are in or outside scope. The test is set out in my paragraph 7 about whether a submission is on the plan change. And there's various principles I've set out, and I summarise those in my paragraph 9. And what you're looking for is to, in paragraph 9A through D, I'll just highlight those so that it's clear in your mind that the submissions must address the extent to which the plan changes the plan, firstly, not be coming out of left field or be completely unanticipated when we consider the purposes of plan change 2. Thirdly, reasonably be said to fall within the ambit of the change, and including incidental or consequential changes that may relate to matters raised, and I'll come back to that because there is a consequential change later I'll address. And in terms of D, it raises potential prejudice and not carry a risk that people affected or interested in plan change 2, if modified by the submission, would be denied an opportunity to participate. So I've applied those principles for paragraph 10 and reached the point that we consider that 4 submissions I've set out in paragraph 11 by Mr. Sheet, the Ministry of Education, Mr. Gertie and Mr. Bishop, all are outside scope for the reasons I've set out there. They are really issues that they raised that weren't addressed by the plan change, and we ask you to just decline to approve those submissions on the basis that they're outside your scope. Ms. Spalding hasn't addressed the merits of them, specifically for that reason, that they just weren't really engaging in topics or issues that she or we considered relevant to the changes promulgated by Plan Change 2. The next topic I address is one I wanted to specifically raise with you, is a consequential change that Ms. Spalding has recommended to Residential 1 Zone Policy 20. And in her work she raised with me that there was a alteration she wanted to recommend to this policy. It didn't directly arise out of a specific opposing submission, and we discussed this and I've outlined the position. So just starting with the law, you're entitled to, and I've set this out in paragraph 15, make consequential or other matters changes to the plan that arise from the submissions, and that jurisdiction arises under clause 10 of the first schedule, and I've set out that provision in full under paragraph 15. So what we're talking about here is Ms. Spalding has recommended a change to that policy to reflect the difference in height limit between the residential 1A and the residential zones, and the reason for that is because if people get to the point of dealing with a resource consent, the policy doesn't really reflect that differentiation between the different height limits, and Ms. Spalding's concern was the policy in applying it doesn't really identify that difference and is probably not giving appropriate or helpful guidance to planners who are processing those consents. So that resulted in the recommendation to alter that policy. The jurisdiction arises from the submissions, and I was thinking about that, and the submission relevant here is that there are a number of submissions that support the plan change entirely. Those are set out in the Section 42A report on page 12, where Ms. Spalding lists the submissions that fully support the plan change. And as a consequence of those submissions, she's recommended that you uphold those, and one of the obvious consequences is the 11-metre height limit, which she's recommended that you retain and is supported by a number of submitters entirely. And so it's my submission to you that in reliance on those general submissions that support the plan change entirely, and if you adopt the recommendation to retain the 11-metre height limit recommended by Ms. Spalding, then as a consequence of doing that, you're entitled in my submission to alter the policy to properly reflect the differentiation between those zones. So that's the logical chain. So it's a bit of a different one. We don't tackle this all the time. So I just wanted to walk you through the logic to that and draw it to your attention so that you understand exactly what we're saying. I also make the point in paragraph 18 that the alternative of not doing that, of just leaving that policy unaltered, is probably unhelpful and is just going to lead to someone having to wrestle with it and apply it in the future in a manner that is just not that helpful. Actual implementing rules. So for practical and legal reasons, it's asked of you to consider that change, and if you're minded to uphold the 11-metre height limit, then you should alter that policy as well. The final point I'll make about this is that there are no submissions that I'm aware of that are specifically opposing the 11-metre height limit directly. So no one's sort of engaged in that topic and saying it should be something different. So it's not likely that anyone's particularly prejudiced by altering a policy to actually align with the rule framework. Topic I just briefly wanted to touch on was the code of practice, and this is one of the pillars of the plan change, and really it's a deliberate move by the council to remove reference to the existing bylaw, do away with that and have the plan refer off to the code of practice in a form that the council officers over time can update and alter to reflect best practice and updated specifications and all the nuts and bolts that go into infrastructure design and specifications. So it's a deliberate way to get the code of practice outside the clasp of plan change objectives, policies and rules, and the need to undertake a first schedule and public participatory process to alter the code of practice, to update it where recommended or appropriate, to pick up any changing specs along the way through the infrastructure networks. Mr. Clark has, in his submission, specifically asked that the plan include a definition of the code of practice, and we do resist that and oppose that from the perspective of it really defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do in terms of get the code of practice out of the plan. If it were to be defined, a definition is probably going to be meaningless, because I would start crafting a definition to say, well, the code of practice is the code of practice that sits outside the plan and might be updated from time to time, and you'll have to find it somewhere outside the plan, and it's not part of the plan, which is the legal position we're trying to implement. So to actually define it in that way, in a flexible manner, is probably meaningless, because where it's referred to in the advice notes, it says that anyway. It says the code of practice. The council has one, so a definition is not actually going to be helpful or clarify things to anyone in our view. So that's where we're at with that. The final point I make is that Ms Spalding has responded to the evidence of Environment Southland and Mr Roy. I can update, this was written prior to Ms Spalding sending in her addendum to her 42A report, which you've now had. So when I wrote this in paras 31 and 32, we were talking about this, and Ms Spalding has since provided an addendum and recommended an alteration to the residential 1A zone so that the density is not increased in the area that is subject to the flood hazard overlay. And you can obviously talk to her and engage with Mr Roy about that. And we've sent that directly to Mr Roy. We haven't had the opportunity to talk to him directly about how that lands with ES, but we're keen to sort of catch him when he arrives, but you should ask him that specifically, and we're keen to hear that too. So I think that issue has been hopefully addressed, but we need to hear from ES on that. So thank you for listening. Those are the matters I wanted to specifically highlight and address for you. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Oh, thank you, Mr Garbutt. We do have some questions. Look, Ms Manera told me this morning, a tip, I think it was you, that said put the speaker right near your mouth. It's a bit intimidating, I've got to say, but it means that it will it'll work for the day. But thank you. We do have some questions, and the way that I'll run questions today is we started down here with introductions, so we'll start at this end with questions and move down through here, and I might ask some questions at the end as chair.
Thanks, Chair. With regard to the legal framework for the National Policy Statement on Urban Design, paragraphs 2 to 6, Kāinga Ora have said that retained density limits are inconsistent with the enabling intent of the National Policy Statement. So legally, what do we need to be satisfied with to be sure that Res 1 and 1A density provisions do give?
So your duty is to make sure the plan does give effect to those, but you can only do so within the scope of the submissions that you have. And so where people have sought changes to the plan, that's well within your rights to consider and make changes. And Kāinga Ora, in support of what they seek, are arguing that it better achieves the MPSUD. That's a fair argument, and it's one you need to weigh up. And what I would say in light of that is the MPSUD is a high-level national framework that seeks to achieve good urban design, good provision for land supply for urban development. And when you get down to Kāinga Ora's relief about things like glazing percentages, the size of a side yard, very nuts and bolts and specifics, you're not going to find the answer in the MPSUD. It just doesn't engage at that level of specificity. So I think their argument is more along the lines of saying, well, the MPSUD wants a lot of housing. You should be very liberal in terms of not having undue restrictions. That's more what they're saying. I don't think the MPSUD specifically gives you a guidance on the nuts and bolts of the changes that they are seeking. Ms Spalding, I know, has wrestled with that issue and provided her recommendations to you and is obviously well familiar with the MPSUD, so she can elaborate on that when you get to her as well.
As a follow-on then, is the sufficient modelled capacity enough, or do we need to be satisfied that the density controls don't impose unnecessary barriers to the type and form of housing that MPSUD is looking to enable?
Certainly capacity is the primary focus. Provided there's sufficient capacity in the city, that is one of the first measures, or the primary measure. The MPS does also seek a range of types and typologies and choice, so that probably goes more to your density question, that you want to make sure that the types and densities of housing provide a choice to the market that is consistent with the MPSUD. Yep.
Thank you.
Morning. My questions are, excuse me, too early in the morning for me. My questions are related to Environment Southland, the national directions and national hazards on paragraphs 24 to 33. I understand PC2 must take account of the national direction on natural hazards, but the panel can only make changes that are within scope. Can you explain in practical terms what natural hazards responses are available to us through this hearing and what would need to wait for a future natural hazards plan change?
Yes, thank you. Yes, your explanation of what you saw your role is exactly consistent with my submission, so I think you're spot on with that. There's 2 points I'd make. The first is that the natural hazards chapter in the district plan is not within scope of this plan change, so it's not a matter for you as part of this process to engage in the natural hazards provisions and look to make changes to those. That's a key first point. You can be assured that the council as a whole has a duty over time to look at those provisions in light of the new national guidance and consider whether any changes should be made to those chapters, but that's not something you need to wrestle with as part of this hearing. The second point is that Mr. Roy makes quite forceful assertions that you're duty bound to give effect to the NPS on natural hazards, and he says it supports his submission. And to a point I agree with that. The difficulty is that the national guidance came out a day after the plan change was notified, so obviously it wasn't prepared in full knowledge of that. So we have a timing issue, and the timing issue results in the position that you exactly outlined, that you're able to make changes within scope of submissions, and you can weigh up whether the changes being sought are more or less consistent with the national guidance. And I think it's right that you consider and weigh up that you should be looking to make changes if they better give effect to national guidance, provided they're within the scope of submissions. And that is probably one of the reasons why Ms. Spalding, when you get to question her about this issue, has responded to what ES have said and sought to not increase the density of the residential 1A within that flood overlay, where ES have now told us that there's a medium to high hazard in that specific area. So that ties in from that perspective.
Thank you very much. Further to that, the current district plan maps the area as riverine inundation level 1, but Mr. Roy's evidence says the area is now assessed as medium to high risk. Can the panel rely on that newer assessment for a targeted PC2 response? And are there any limits because the natural hazard maps and chapter have not yet been updated? So you've possibly covered most of that in that first question.
Possibly, but I'll just simply add to it that Ms. Spalding has simply relied on the current mapping in the district plan to identify the area and not gone beyond that. So we are just relying on the current maps and not seeking to bring forward any new information to engage, other than to respect the evidence of ES that they consider that there's a new risk assessment, and in that area Ms. Spalding has made the recommendation she has.
Thank you. I have one more question that's relevant to this, and we might have covered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Mr. Roy says the national direction takes precedence where it's more stringent. For those of us who are not lawyers, does that mean it overrides the current district plan, or does it guide what response the panel can make within this plan change?
Oh, sorry, he says the MPS takes precedence?
Yes, where it is more stringent.
I don't think that's quite right. I think the duty is that the plan implement or give effect to the MPS, but as we've already said, it's only in terms of the context of this hearing within the scope of submissions already made. So the MPS doesn't specifically override any of the objectives, policies or rules. What you're trying to do is make sure that the objectives, policies and rules implement the NPS within scope of submissions. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. I know that in your opening introductions you covered a little bit about the Code of Practice, so my question is relevant to that paragraphs 19 to 23. It's Council's position is that the Code of Practice sits outside of the district plan and is not legally incorporated into it. In practical legal terms, what can Council use the Code for when processing consents? When can it not use it for? And what happens if the Code conflicts with the district plan?
I'll answer that last point first, what happens when it conflicts. It shouldn't conflict because the plan change has removed out of the plan provisions some of the specifications that were in there previously, so that that refers off to the code of practice. So it's intended, it shouldn't be in conflict or inconsistent is the intention. So that shouldn't arise. When it can be used, well, it can certainly be used by the infrastructure teams when applications are made to connect to networks such as Three Waters, and they have it as effectively a guidebook to say what are the specs that developers and applicants should be, designing their infrastructure to meet. And so it's a guidance from the Three Waters and probably roading point of view in terms of what are the appropriate specs. So when anyone is seeking to connect or permission, those are the rules. So officers will administer it from that point of view. It can also be referred to, say, through a subdivision consent if someone is proposing specifications for a subdivision design. They can be looked at as useful guidance and potentially conditions imposed on a subdivision consent if seen as appropriate and necessary to require certain infrastructure to meet the specs in the code of practice. It's probably also, before you get to that point, for applicants, surveyors and developers to look at the code to say how should we design our roads, footpaths, Three Waters, so that they know going into that they've got a rule book and a set of specs to design to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Look, I only have one question, and that's just in regards to the IPI properties further submission. So in their further submission, they introduced a request to reduce 3.5 metre access requirement to 3 metres for some rear site development, and that was not in the original submission. I could not see if it actually connected to anybody else's submission, particularly because FENZ were seeking the opposite. So I just wanted to know whether or not that further submission is in scope, and if it is valid, which original submission would it support or oppose?
Just trying to understand whether Ms Spalding had assessed that and made a recommendation on it.
No, I don't believe so. And it did only come up in the further submission. But you're welcome to look at that and come back on that point.
Ms Spalding advises me, and she can advise you directly, that she didn't make a recommendation on that further submission because she considered it was out of scope, and that would be consistent with my advice that a further submission can only support or oppose an original submission. They can't enlarge the scope. So if it's not linked to something that's already been raised in a submission, I don't think you can consider it and approve it because it would be out of scope.
Great, thank you. They are all the questions that we have for you so far.
Oh, thank you very much. So thank you. I'll move to Ms Shannon Baxter, and she's pre-circulated evidence. I just remind you that she's giving evidence as a council manager, not as an independent expert under the code. She made that clear in her evidence, but I just draw your attention to that. And she has a short summary to summarise her evidence for you. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou. I'm the Senior Policy Planner for Invercargill City Council, and I was asked to provide evidence that gives some background as to the Plan Change 2 process, including the pre-notification portion of it and the goals. So I thought I would still take you through a really short summary, even though I know you've been provided it in written evidence, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. The housing needs assessments from 2023 identified a misalignment between the existing housing stock in our community and the needs of our community, particularly in regards to smaller attached homes close to the city centre. So during the next year's LTP engagement process, Council sought community feedback on ideas to support quality housing development in the district plan. Most of the feedback highlighted with dated housing stock. They thought there was a need for redevelopment and the importance of increasing density to enable greater housing choice. However, it's worth noting that respondents also stressed that it needed to be approached carefully and take into account good urban design, proximity to services, to infrastructure, to green spaces. All of this pre-engagement led to council commencing work on the plan change later that year in partnership with Te Ao Marama on behalf of Runanga, who fed into the scope of the plan change and were involved throughout the process, with all decisions being made collaboratively. A councillor reference group was established to provide governance structure and for decision-making on the plan change direction as it would be developed. There were 3 main goals for the plan change. First, to enable greater density and diversity of housing in the residential 1 and 1A zones. 2, to promote well-designed housing to provide better social and environmental outcomes. And 3, to decouple the expired code of practice from the district plan. As noted in my evidence, Papakāinga was originally included in the scope of the project, but it was removed due to signaled national direction on Papakāinga, a decision that was made in tandem with Te Ao Marama. So the project team and Te Ao Marama developed and tested options and a preferred approach for the plan change, which was then taken to the community for feedback through various methods. The preferred approach was generally well received, so we moved on to drafting. They started on the content of the plan change and commissioned all the necessary technical reports. Further engagement with the Schedule 1 parties was completed, and then midway through the drafting process, the government made changes to the RMA that required councils to stop working on any plan changes or seek approval to continue. Council decided to apply for an exemption to continue this work, and they received that exemption in late 2025, which led to council giving approval to proceed to notification. Council considers the plan change to reflect community aspirations, technical evidence, and strategic direction. The proposed provisions support sustainable growth, revitalization, and improved housing outcomes across Waihopai and Invercargill. Thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Baxter. We do have some questions, and this time I will start at this end with Ms. Bond.
Thank you. Ms. Baxter, I'm going to refer to the Code of Conduct in my question. So one of the PC2's goals was to remove outdated Code of Practice references from the district plan so the current code can sit outside the plan and be updated more flexibly. At a practical level, how will applicants be directed to the current Code of Practice when preparing subdivision or residential development proposals?
I don't think I know that answer. We know how it's been created in tandem with SDC, and they have it on their website. Perhaps we'll follow that lead, but I can't say for sure.
I think you may have covered my answer already, but I'll just put it, and if you've got anything further to add, you just add that. Thank you. Can you briefly explain the problem PC2 is trying to solve, particularly why council focused on enabling more smaller, right-sized homes close to the CBD and services, including for an ageing population?
Sure. So by enabling people to build on smaller lots and increase that density, the ability for developers to create more housing, and specifically smaller housing, which is closer to all the services that particularly elderly people would need, so closer to the CBD with shops and doctors and appointments and things like that.
It's slightly off to the side, but with the move away from having to look at Papakāinga housing, it's slightly subjective, but do you still have a good level of comfort of the engagement we had with Te Ao Marama through the process?
Yes, I wasn't involved pre-notification, I should mention, but yes, I know that the design team was collaborating heavily with Te Ao Marama. They were there from the very start before they ever worked on the scope, had several one-on-one hui's, were in all the consultation. And a comment that was made to me by the design team that were involved in that exercise was that even though Papakāinga was taken out of the scope of this plan change, depending on what's happening with legislation, there was still confidence that, we still have the spatial plan coming up, or depending legislation, once again, district plan review. So there's still an opportunity to take that back into scope.
Right, thank you, Ms Baxter. I don't have any further questions. I just wanted to check with the panel. Are you comfortable with me calling, you're all done your making good decisions course, so are you comfortable with me calling you commissioners rather than councillors for the purpose of today?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I should have checked that earlier in the day. So we're quite comfortable to move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next witness is Mr Tim Church. Tim, you're online. Can you come back on? There you are. So Mr Church has provided, and hopefully it found its way to the panel, a summary statement where he's responded to a couple of matters that have come up from Kāinga Ora. So I'll hand you over to Tim. I don't know if you want him to read that through, or I presume you've had a chance to pre-read it, but yeah. Tim, the panel have pre-read your summary statement.
Right.
I wonder, are there key things you want to emphasise, or has anything changed that you want to draw to the panel's attention other than what you've written?
No, I don't think so. I'm happy to just proceed to questions if the panel are comfortable with that.
Yep.
I think the panel are, so can you answer questions? Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you so much. And this time, I'm trying to keep track of where I went, but Commissioner Ludlow's next.
So with the urban design guide generally, it's not part of the district plan and there were no submissions on its content. From an urban design perspective though, is it appropriate to manage medium density design through enforceable standards and matters of discretion, supported by non-statutory guidance?
That's pretty typical. Obviously, there is always a changing context when it comes to urban design, and as the neighbourhoods mature over time, there may be issues that arise where you might want to address things, particular issues that arise in design guidance, and being able to have the flexibility to change that guidance document is quite useful, so without having to go through plan changes and things like that. So having that as a outside the statutory plan is quite useful in that sense. In addition, design guidance can potentially provide a lot more detail and a lot more sort of supplementary guidance, if you like, that can support those developing in these neighbourhoods. So in my opinion, it's actually quite good to have that flexibility outside the plan to have those supplementary things and be able to change it. Having said that, I think it's good to have sort of keyword references, if you like. So there is they talk to each other in terms of key concepts and words which are pretty universal in terms of urban design outcomes.
There were a couple of points raised by Kāinga Ora in the residential 1A medium density zone rules. Kāinga Ora say that the rules are overcomplicated and that built form standards can manage good urban form. So from an urban design perspective, is density per square metre still a useful trigger for closer assessment? And can the number of units itself create urban design issues where site coverage and height and setbacks and outdoor space standards are met?
In my experience, a combination between the numbers of units. So if you have a threshold of a certain number of units, and say, the threshold that's in the plan of 3 is acceptable from my perspective, where you're sort of minimising the risk of poor outcomes from an urban design perspective. But I think the ability to have built form controls and then a trigger for those urban design assessment beyond that is important. As I've said in my statement, I think they're the primary considerations. However, I am aware that, as I said in my statement, that there are potential perverse outcomes that come from, potential development outcomes as developers change the way that they respond to these provisions. So in my mind, having a precautionary principle of having a minimum density with the same assessment matters is appropriate in this instance.
Again, with Kāinga Ora, they say that in their submission that a fixed 20% glazing rule can force poor design outcomes, including privacy, security and thermal performance. You support the rule because it helps achieve active frontages and passive surveillance. In practical terms, though, why is a fixed 20% baseline needed rather than perhaps relying on an overall design assessment?
In my mind, it is quite difficult because when you're doing it, in my experience, when you're doing a holistic urban design assessment of something, there's a lot of compromises that get made in the context of a site-specific development. In my mind, it's really important to have that glazing provision in there because it is quite hard amongst a whole range of other issues to ensure that glazing gets up to an acceptable level. I don't, as I said in my statement, I don't think 20% is extravagant, and in reviewing some of those recent resource consents that Ms Baxter has kindly shared with me, I think that 20% is a good level. Below that, I think you're getting into sort of quite small window sizes and that sort of thing. I can't speak, my area of expertise doesn't cover thermal performance and that sort of thing. So I'm really bringing this from an urban design perspective, and from my perspective, having that surveillance, having that sense of activation, having that good public realm interface is important.
Thank you. Some submitters want the plan to require high-quality urban design, while the recommendation uses good quality urban design. In practical terms, is there much difference between those two phrases? Does good quality risk lowering the standard, or is it a more workable way to assess the standard?
In my opinion, I think it's a more workable way. We're dealing, obviously there's a broad spectrum of urban environments out there, and as I've said in my statement, I think there are more high-profile, more complex places that deserve a real attention and a real dedication to high-quality urban design. I think in these large residential neighbourhoods where there's a lot of quite similar sort of building typologies that people know and develop on a regular basis, just achieving good urban design, I think, and getting those fundamentals right is important. And we just have to, well, from my perspective, we also need to think about, the affordability and the facilitating the sort of urban renewal has been one of those things. And I see if you have the expectations too high, then that potentially minimises the amount of how streamlined you can make these developments in terms of getting through the process. So in my experience, I'm comfortable with good urban design.
Thank you. Now, with regard to residential 1A space around buildings, Kāinga Ora says 1 metre side and rear setbacks are normal for medium density housing. Can you explain why a 1 metre setback might be okay for a single storey garage, but not generally for living areas or habitable buildings?
Yeah, so I do agree with Kāinga Ora that 1 metre is predominant, and obviously that's in the NDRS national medium density standards. I think a lot of this plan change has been looking to, I guess, take that national guidance but adapt it to context, which is obviously the most southern city in New Zealand and has quite a lot of character associated with it already, and so I am conscious that there is a sense of spaciousness that the community has responded to and has aspirations for. So, in my mind, it's about striking a balance between providing a basic amenity for those people living within dwellings. So in my mind and my experience, having 1 metre setbacks are quite tight spaces. So really, they only provide for, say, a 900 millimetre sort of standard footpath width, for instance, or access width. They don't provide for the ability to screen, taller fences. They tend to be sort of darker spaces, if you like, and the visual dominance of seeing fences and buildings landing hard on the site can actually detract from the amenity and outlook within these dwellings. I did review some of the recent resource consents that have come through from Ms. Baxter in terms of the current good practice that Mr. Clark has raised, and in many of those they're well in excess of the 1.5 metres. So in my mind, that's one mechanism which can help transition that density between the existing development and future development, and there's quite a lot of enabled height and other bulk and location provisions that can help that. In regard to garages, you've obviously got a different interface between neighbours, and in that sense, and the outlook provision for people living within these dwellings is different. So garages are less sensitive from my perspective in terms of that 1 metre relationship.
Thank you very much.
I've got 2 questions for you, if that's okay, this morning.
Sure.
And my first question is around permeable surfaces. Kāinga Ora seeks to reduce the amount of permeable surface from 30% to 20%. In other words, less grass, garden or other ground that can absorb rain. Aside from stormwater, does keeping 30% also help with good site design? For example, does it help provide space for landscaping, privacy outlook, outdoor living, and a less built-up feel?
In my opinion, yes. And I think we've provided quite a lot of explanation around that in the various reporting. I think, again, it comes back to the sort of contextual approach of the plan change and trying to sort of strike an appropriate balance between providing for intensification and meeting the sort of character and those contextual issues that are associated with Invercargill itself. And so I think the ability to and again, coming back to the higher height levels and the sort of other bulk and location provisions that enable larger developments to come in here, I think the ability to balance that off with permeable surfacing, which is not just for permeability itself, it's also providing the amenity and other things, as you say. So yes, all those aspects that you listed, I agree with, and a good rationale for achieving that.
My next question is relative to the site coverage. Also staying with Kāinga Ora, they seek to allow buildings to cover up to 50% of a site, while your evidence supports 45%. In practical terms, what differences does the extra 5% make? Why does it matter for things like sunlight, usable outdoor space, openness and livability?
Yeah, so the difference between 45 and 50 is, again, that sense of openness, the presence of bulk on the site, and just the amount of, in my mind, the amount of open space that's actually provided around dwellings. So, so the ability to, what shall I say? I think it does come back to, again, that contextual response and the ability to accommodate other, to go up, if you like, rather than out, I think is important. So in my mind, the ability to have different typologies is still there with a slightly smaller building footprint. And that allows you to just sort of get some more wiggle room between different neighbouring properties. So, and the appearance from the street, sort of bulk and location appearance. So, in my mind, by amending the recession plane angles and the building height, as been referenced earlier this morning, that in a way compensates for that smaller footprint that's on the site, and provides that sort of openness and spaciousness and the ability to get more sort of natural light into buildings. So I think again, with that contextual approach, it sort of strikes a good balance.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further questions for you, and so we're quite happy to move on.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Church, and Madam Chair, you comfortable that Mr. Church excuses himself, and we'll get him back if needed, but otherwise he can be excused for the rest of the day? Yes, thank you, Mr. Church. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness is Rob Hayes.
Thank you. Just a summary of what we've presented to you is that we believe that we do have sufficient capacity in the network. We're currently undertaking modelling of the entire city. That's not available yet, but we feel that we do have sufficient capacity in the network or keep up with upgrading within our current programs. Very reliant on the uptake. If it goes staggered over 10, 20, 30 years, yes, we don't believe we'll have an issue if the uptake's fast. Yes, we'll need to look at upgrading ahead of the current renewal programming. Questions about that? Welcome to take them.
We do have a number of questions. Keeping in mind that some of our questions might be technical because we're not the technical expert. So if they're technical and you prefer to take some time to go, look, I'd rather have a couple of days to answer that question, please do that. But keep in mind that what we're trying to really understand here is what's in your head. So whatever information you can share with us as non-technical experts in the space is really appreciated. So we'll go to Commissioner Bond first.
Thank you. I have a question. It's relative to the private ways and rights of way. So IPI Property seeks flexibility for some rear site access ways to reduce from 3.5 metres to 3 metres. If the panel has scope to consider that, what would 3 metres be acceptable from an engineering, servicing and emergency access perspective? Would it create any safety, servicing or precedent concerns?
Have to be analysed on a case-by-case basis, but for an example, the fire service require 3.5. So that's, in short, no. Yep.
My other question is, it's related to the permeable surfaces. Kāinga Ora seeks 20% permeable surface instead of 30%. In other words, less grass, garden or other ground that can absorb rain. Can you explain in practical terms why Council considers 30% is needed from a stormwater perspective?
Basically, it adds another 10% stormwater flow, so it's putting another 10% of the flow into the network. But I couldn't give any more detail of that. If you wanted to expand the question, I'd have to come back to you.
Hi. My question is related to general submissions, FENS and the infrastructure capacity. I understand FENS concerns are now resolved, but for the panel's understanding, can you explain in plain terms how council makes sure new residential development has adequate infrastructure, including access, firefighting, water supply and network capacity before it proceeds?
We do have historic modelling, which we do use. We do have many people who are very experienced on the network that we do rely on heavily to make those calls. From a firefighting perspective, if we believe the development is significant enough or there is issues with the network, we physically test it.
I just have a follow-up on that because I don't quite understand like how it works together. So the code itself connects to what FENS say that they want or need from a water supply perspective. And so when you get a resource consent in, does the person making a decision on the consent, they look to the code, but would they also come and get some advice from council on how it might connect into the network?
Yes, they do, and we often have pre-planning meetings and we discuss those issues up front, and if we need water tests done, we do that. There's pretty stringent guidelines about water supply, 25 litres a second, for instance, to each hydrant.
Right, so it's quite movable, so you're not just applying a static code. If you go, actually, in fact, we need to test this a little bit more, you go out and you do that testing.
Yes, we do, and in land development, nothing is the same. Everything is different. Yep.
Right, thank you.
A couple of questions on the code of practice. In the submission from Gareth Clark, he's concerned that plan users might be a little bit uncertain about which version of the code of practice applies. So in practice, how do council engineers identify the relevant version when they're assessing a subdivision or a development?
New code of practice is in full swing now. There was a transition from the old one. That's completed. There is only one code of practice active.
What sorts of, and this is possibly speculative, I accept, but what sorts of updates do you think council could expect over time, and why is it important that those updates can be made without a plan change?
The code of practice references other documents, including Austroads for roading, for example, and 4404, which is the national standard for land development, references outside that. So there's also stuff like changes in products, changes in technology, changes in plans and zoning, for example, that needs to be reviewed on an annual basis.
Great, thank you. And I have no further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You're free to go also too. And final witness is Ms. Spalding, who's the 42A officer. I'll just hand it.
Kia ora koutou. Did you receive my hearing statement summary this morning? Would you like me to read through that, or
Have a quick look. We haven't actually had the time to read it because we've got
I'm happy to read it.
Yeah, it's just. I think that would be helpful. Yes, please.
My name is Emma Spalding. I'm a planning consultant and partner at Taylor Planning. I prepared the Section 42A report on Plan Change 2 and assisted with the preparation of the Section 32 report and drafting of the provisions. I confirm that I've read all the submissions, further submissions, submitted evidence and relevant technical and higher order documents relevant to my Section 42A report, and I have the qualifications and experience as set out in my report. Plan Change 2 seeks to enable greater housing density and diversity across parts of Invercargill while maintaining good urban design outcomes and updating references to Council's Code of Practice. The Section 42A report dated 20th of April 2026 assesses the submissions received on Plan Change 2 and provides my officer recommendations to assist the panel in its deliberations. Overall, the report recommends that Plan Change 2 should proceed subject to a number of targeted refinements arising from submissions and supporting technical evidence. The Section 42A recommended amendments include changes to activity status, matters of discretion, and changes to improve the plan usability and internal plan consistency. These changes will improve the clarity and efficiency of the provisions. Submissions seeking wholesale removal of the density controls or reinstatement of the operative provisions are not supported, as they are not considered consistent with the evidence base or the objectives of the plan change. I consider that the plan change provisions as recommended in the Section 42A report will appropriately enable housing intensification, particularly in the residential 1A zone, and will address the identified housing capacity and diversity needs. The rule framework is intended to strike an appropriate balance between enabling medium density residential development while also managing the effects on residential amenity, neighbourhood character and infrastructure capacity. Following completion of the Section 42A report, I prepared an addendum dated the 12th of May 2026 in response to the detailed hearing evidence of Mr. Marcus Roy, Strategy and Policy Manager at Environment Southland. The addendum focuses specifically on the residential density within the residential 1A zone in the areas subject to the Riverine Inundation Level 1 hazard overlay. And we have a map up here which shows that area. It's a little bit hard to see, but Shannon's just pointing that out at the moment with the mouse. So it covers roughly about 5% of the residential 1A zone. And as set out in my addendum, following review of the Environment Southland evidence, I've recommended a further targeted amendment to the residential 1A density provisions to maintain the status quo for areas subject to the Riverine Inundation Level 1 hazard. So this basically means that the density rules for the residential 1A zone, the residential 1 zone, will continue to apply to this area. I also acknowledge the evidence received from Mr. Gareth Clark, Kāinga Ora and Te Whatu Ora. At this stage, no other changes to the provisions are recommended in response to that evidence, but I do have a couple of points of clarification. And I also remain open to consideration of the evidence presented at today's hearing and understand I'll have the opportunity to make a reply to the matters heard. In relation to Mr. Gareth Clark's evidence, I note that he's requested additional analysis of the medium density housing demand in Invercargill and the ability of the Business 1 zone to accommodate that demand. I don't consider that this is necessary, and I consider that there has been sufficient analysis undertaken in the rationale reports which were appended to the Section 32A report. I don't consider that the additional capacity available in the Business 1 zone would be a basis to decline the plan change. The MPSUD requires that Council provide at least sufficient development capacity to meet the expected demand for housing, and there's no restriction on providing for additional capacity beyond that minimum. I also note that the MPSUD specifically acknowledges in Objective 4 that New Zealand's urban environments, including their amenity values, develop and change over time in response to the diverse and changing needs of people, communities, and future generations. Retention of the status quo in the residential 1A zone is not considered an appropriate outcome, as it doesn't adequately respond to the identified shortfall in smaller attached homes in central locations. The residential 1A zone is a location that has been specifically identified as appropriate for increased housing intensification, as it's close to jobs and community services, public transport and other amenities. In terms of the Kāinga Ora evidence, I've one clarification to make relating to the activity status of rules Res 1AZ, R12 and R13, which relates to the space around buildings. Ms Bennett identified that I had omitted to include a recommendation on the activity status of breaching these rules. Kāinga Ora requests that the notified discretionary activity status should be changed to restricted discretionary, and the matters listed in Res 1AZ R15 should become the matters of discretion. My recommendation is that this activity status should be retained as discretionary, as was set out in the notified provisions. A change to restricted discretionary would be inconsistent with the plan, as the majority of the other zones in the operative plan list a breach of the space around buildings rule as discretionary. Res 1AZ R15 lists the matters that will be among those taken into account when assessing a breach of this rule. These matters are not considered to be comprehensive enough to be used as matters of discretion if the activity status were to be amended to restricted discretionary. There may be additional matters not listed in the rule which would require assessment in certain circumstances. Just as an example, if a carport or garage was proposed in the front boundary setback, an assessment of streetscape character and amenity or the safety of pedestrians may be relevant considerations which are not covered. As such, I recommend that this rule be retained as notified. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for your addendum and setting out what the new rule would look like. That's really helpful. And the section 32AA that went with it, also helpful. So yes, we will turn to questions and we'll start with Commissioner Ludlow.
Thank you. Your further evidence, I'm just looking at the submissions from Kāinga Ora, and your further evidence this morning smacked two of those out of the park, so that's great. But on the definition of medium density housing, Kāinga Ora says the 350 metre squared threshold makes the definition read like a rule. Why do you consider that the threshold belongs in definition rather than just in the Res 1A rules?
The reason for that is because if someone were to come along to the residential 1 zone and apply for consent for housing to that density, so below the 350 square metres, then it would trigger assessment of the medium density urban design matters, which are set out in the policy.
Next, thank you. To do with the residential zones overview, and in fact you've answered it probably mainly in paragraph 11 of your addendum, but my question is, Mr Clark's concerned that the wording changes could lower amenity expectations as more housing is enabled. In plain terms, how do the recommended provisions still protect people's amenity while also accepting that neighbourhoods may look a bit different over time?
So the plan change started with some option development and a preferred approach report and scoping report. I wasn't involved at that stage, but that information was shared with the community and there was a lot of feedback given, and changes were made to the provisions at that point to address community concerns and feedback received. So part of the provisions were drafted with community amenity in mind. Mr Church has also done a lot of modelling and provided input into the provisions, so the bulk and location standards have been designed to maintain that standard of amenity.
Thank you. And a further question with regard to universal design. Dr McLaughlin's evidence talks about Invercargill's ageing population, activity limitations and ageing in place. Having considered that evidence, why do you still think universal design is best dealt with in policies and matters of discretion rather than in the main residential objective?
I think the way that the objectives and policies have been written was that the objective provided the overall outcome that we're wanting to seek for this zone, and then the policy implements that objective by providing that more detailed guidance about how we want to achieve that objective. And that's where I think the inclusion of universal design is most appropriate.
Thank you. My question is relative to submission rule sub R3 on page 19, and I want to probably tease this out a little bit more. Kāinga Ora says that if the housing layout has already been approved through a land use consent or has been assessed at the same time, the minimum lot size should not be reassessed again at subdivision stage. In practical terms, why does it still matter how the land is divided into separate titles once the housing layout has already been approved?
Is that submission point in relation to the residential 1 or 1A zone?
Sub R3.
Yeah, sub R3. Sorry, sub R3.
Page 19 of your section 42A.
On that rule.
I think it's the old age question that we hear quite a bit about. If it's already assessed at land use, then why do it again at subdivision?
So sub R3, if the allotments are going down below 300 square metres, and it's being applied for concurrently with a land use consent for residential development, or already contains a residential development, then that is a restricted discretionary subdivision. So it still needs subdivision consent, obviously. Every subdivision needs consent, but it's a restricted discretionary rather than discretionary.
So do you mind if I just
Yeah.
jump in? Sorry, just to follow up on it. So my understanding of what Kāinga Ora are saying is they might have already been given a land use consent, and the effects are assessed at that stage. So why is there a need to have a second assessment at the subdivision stage?
I think it would just be the more technical aspects of infrastructure and access. Sometimes if you have multi-unit developments on a site, they might share infrastructure arrangements, whereas if the site was to be subdivided, it would need to be separated or potentially easements put in place.
So they're assessing different things. Right, great. Now it's me. Okay, right. Look, I just have a few quick questions. And then, if you don't mind, if Kāinga Ora wouldn't mind if we actually continue to take a break at 10:15, would that be okay? Okay, great, thank you. Well, it's 10:19 now, so at the end of these questions. So I just have a general question about Kāinga Ora seeking to have the number of units per site approach for residential 1, and I just wanted to know in practical terms, why do you consider that's too significant for this plan change rather than a valid effects-based response? Is it again the same answer, that it's assessing different effects?
You mean in terms of the subdivision rules, or?
That this is actually residential 1A density, so overall they're saying, well, look, that you could make it quite simple and just have number of units.
Again, that comes back to the feedback from the community and the stakeholders that we received early on, and that they still want to maintain some, they don't want things to go too far down the track of increasing density, and they still want to maintain the character of Invercargill. The way that we've amended the rules, we have enabled additional medium density quite considerably from how the current rules operate, where you need the 2,000 square metre site as a starting point. And then also just the evidence that we've had from Rationale, who have basically said that the rules as we've proposed them will meet all the demand that Invercargill needs under a high growth scenario over the 30-year time frame. So we're just trying to balance the community expectations with the density that we enable. This is where we've landed.
Great, thank you. You've answered all of the questions I had in regards to the natural hazards in your addendum, so thank you. So I just have one very final clean-up drafting question. So this is for correction. So on page 27 of your report, you refer to Res P3, and I think that you intend for it to be referring to Res P5, so just want to check that and get that on record. Page 27. I've had the paragraph number for you. If there were any, let me find it.
I don't think I had paragraph
You
numbers.
didn't.
Sorry.
27.
I've found it.
You found it. Oh, yeah, it's in your final recommendation. I recommend for the above reasons that Res P3 and these rules, but if we're looking actually at this is the assessment of Res P1 and P5, not 3.
Yes, that should refer to P5.
Great, we'll be able to put that in our report. And then just finally, just matter of drafting. So you've, on some cases where there's been matters of discretion, they've been in a separate rule number, but where they've been pulled forward to be a restricted discretionary item, then you've incorporated them into the rule. So is it deliberate that where it's discretionary, that it still stays out in its own rule, and then restricted discretionary is being pulled up into the rule itself?
That may just be an inconsistency issue, but I could look at that and just make that consistent across the plan, if that's helpful.
Yes, if you can make it consistent across the provisions that we're looking at. And I've got an example here of Res 1AZ, R14 and R15. So that was where I picked it up, but it might be in other places. So thank you. That'll be really helpful. Thanks. So we're quite comfortable now. Mr. Garbett?
Thank you. I hope you've received everything you feel you need. That does conclude the Council's presentation. We'll obviously listen and reply to anything that arises. Ms Spalding indicated she hoped to have the end of hearing opportunity, and as part of that I was expecting that she would provide you a full set of provisions that she recommends, now obviously picking up on that drafting issue as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for all of your time, and we will now take a very short recess. And if we're, why don't we take 15 minutes now? We'll take our 15 minutes and we'll come back with Kaingaroa straight after. Thank you. Thank you. good?
Yeah. I'll just start that one.
To press the black.
And I was like pondering on it, going, now I need to.
This is a restricted discretionary activity, and then list the matters. And then other times, you could.
So this is the set layout.
panel questions are really designed to help us understand your position and also the practical implications of what you're actually asking for. And if we need more time to work through that, then we will take it. And if you think that we need more time to understand...
Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. We're just having some issues with the live stream.
Okay. Well, do you want me to stop? And
Yeah, our apologies if you could just hold off for 1 moment. Oh, now it's working now that I interrupted her.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
so sorry.
For the value of the live stream, I'm just going to repeat what I've just said. And I should have checked first to see if the live stream was up and running, so apologies for that. So I was just saying before we start with all submitters, the panel wants to thank all submitters for being here and taking the time to prepare and engage with this process. Please know that we have read all written materials, so you do not need to read that word for word. Instead, please focus on the key points that you want the panel to understand, any changes to the provisions that you seek or any different position you take than council recommendations. If you need more time than is allocated, we will take the time. We've got a number of questions, particularly with Kāinga Ora, so we might take a little bit more time than is allocated to really understand your position. And so we've been talking about how to pronounce your surname, Ms. Beneke?
Bianca.
Benaka.
Yeah.
Benaka. Benaka.
Thank you. It's an odd name. Every single E in my name is pronounced differently too, so just to give you...
It was. Oh, well, kia ora, and welcome. Over to you to start.
Morena, tēnā koutou commissioners and everyone in the room. My name is Lizelle Bianca. I'm a Principal Development Planner at Kāinga Ora, and I'm presenting corporate evidence in relation to Plan Change 2. Thank you so much for taking the time to consider the evidence and the Kāinga Ora submission. I'll just reiterate as well that I am a corporate witness, even though I am a planner, a professional planner, so this is based on the corporate view. I thought I'd just quickly read a couple of speaking notes just to point out the key points within my evidence, and then I'll zip through that because obviously there are quite a few questions which I anticipated. So Kāinga Ora supports the overall direction of the plan change and acknowledges the work undertaken to progress these provisions. However, we consider that a number of provisions do not yet provide a sufficient enabling or efficient framework to support housing delivery within Invercargill. The amendments sought are targeted refinements to improve the usability of the plan and its ability to respond to housing demand. In terms of the context of Kāinga Ora and Invercargill, we manage approximately 419 homes, and we currently have about 189 households on the housing register. That's the MSD register, and these are families that are waiting for homes, not individual people. What we have found over the last probably decade, there has been a clear shift in demand with increasing need for the 1 and 2 bedroom homes. While much of our existing stock within Invercargill does not align with that current need. I would also note within the rationale reports that were attached to the Section 32 for council that also identified the need for smaller typologies because of that ageing population that has been identified in Invercargill. The majority of our Invercargill stock is old and is in need of redevelopment, and I think that is quite known here as well. Our current redevelopment program within Invercargill has slowed. There's 2 main reasons for this, one being the current government direction, which is around renewal, and because we have struggled to deliver under the current provisions within the plan. This is because of the density risk and risk of notification as well. This has unfortunately led us to underbriefing development potential, and because we carry this risk, we have tended to focus on acquisition of houses at the moment from the private market. All of this reinforces the need for a planning framework that enables redevelopment and intensification in a practical and feasible way. So the key issues within my evidence and the ones that I wanted to draw out were the medium density definition, the residential density provisions, subdivision around a lawfully established building or dwelling, activity status, and then the glazing and space around buildings. Across these topics, we have focused on an evidence-based, effects-based approach. So in terms of the medium density definition, Kaingoa seeks the deletion of the medium density definition, or alternatively deletion of the specific requirement around that density of 350 square metres. We consider the definition goes beyond interpretation and instead introduces a quantified density control, effectively operating as a rule. We consider that it's inconsistent with plan drafting practice and the intent of the national planning standards. Density is more appropriately managed through zone standards such as height, setbacks and site coverage. This is also key to our second matter, which is obviously the density, the residential density provisions. So to go on to that, we consider the residential density provisions as notified are not sufficiently enabling and are inconsistent with the intent of the NPSUD. In practice, they constrain development feasibility and can result in underutilisation of land due to perceived consenting risk. We obviously seek a simpler approach by providing the number of units as a permitted activity rather, and then using those development performance standards to wrap around to be able to provide the outcomes needed. Whilst the capacity report attached to the Section 32 notes that there is sufficient feasible capacity within the plan change, this doesn't provide the realisable capacity. That's what we consider. We also note that reducing consenting barriers and density controls provides for better opportunity to redevelop at different scales and typologies, especially delivering smaller typologies which have been identified. In paragraph 4.14 of my evidence, I'll just restate that part there, which is an enabling planning framework should be capable of responding to demand as it arises, rather than constraining development based on current projections. Long-term projections can change over time. This is noted within the rationale report, which notes that the plan change does not meet the requirements of a high-growth future and fails to provide adequate capacity in central areas, even under a medium growth scenario. I guess the key part there within one of the sentences in paragraph 4.14, I might address one of the questions I noted that the council were asked. So sufficient capacity, the NPSUD anticipates the planning frameworks will provide sufficient capacity and remove unnecessary barriers to development. These are complementary, not alternative requirements. Moving on to the subdivision question. So we consider that the subdivision around an approved or existing land use, that shouldn't have a minimum density requirement, net site area. Subdivision controls should not duplicate matters already assessed at the land use stage. Minimum lot sizes are, as we consider, a blunt tool and do not add value where development is already approved. Kaingoa seeks that minimum lot sizes to apply only to vacant subdivision and no notification where subdivision implements an approved development. So that's providing notification preclusions. This improves efficiency without undermining outcomes. In terms of the activity status, and thank you for the clarification, Ms. Balding, the current activity status framework is overly restrictive, in our opinion, for a zone that anticipates intensification. Discretionary and non-complying statuses introduce unnecessary risk and discourage development. A restricted discretionary framework is more appropriate, allowing effects to be assessed while reducing consenting barriers. And just in response to Ms. Spalding, if the assessment criteria isn't considered appropriate, there is obviously a possibility to make some tweaks to be able to provide for that. The combination of discretionary non-complying activity status and perceived notification risk can materially influence development outcomes. This can result in schemes being scaled back to avoid triggering those thresholds, and this is obviously proof of what we've been trying to do as well. This can lead to underutilisation of well-located land, even where additional development could be accommodated while achieving appropriate amenity outcomes. Finally, just in closing, in terms of the glazing and space around buildings, we seek the deletion of the glazing standard and reliance on an effects-based approach. The current requirement can result in poor design outcomes, reduced privacy and safety concerns. We also seek reducing side and rear yards to 1 metre. Larger setbacks reduce developable area and constrain efficient site layouts and housing yield. Amenity is better achieved through overall design rather than fixed numerical standards. So in closing, While Plan Change 2 is a positive step, it does not yet fully achieve the enabling intent of the NPSUD. The amendments sought to simplify the framework, remove unnecessary constraints, and better enable housing delivery. And this will support a more responsive planning framework capable of meeting both current and future housing needs. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Benaka. And thank you for listening to the questions that we had of council witnesses earlier today and responding to some of them in your speaking notes. That's really helpful to give your alternative view on some of that. I see that you do have speaking notes, and I wanted to check with you whether you would be comfortable providing those speaking notes to the panel afterwards.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great, because I didn't want to give you more work to do, but that would be helpful. There were a couple of points in there that you raised that weren't in the original evidence, so I think it would be helpful. And then we offer you the same invitation that we had to all council experts, that if we ask you a question that you think you need more time, then please take that time, but only a little bit of time, and have it to us by the end of the week so that it can be made available to our Section 42A reporting officer. For the final right of reply, but that's your choice. You get to decide if you'd rather say, look, actually, I'll provide that in writing. We won't be requesting anything particularly. So now we will come to panel questions, and then just for the submitters that have arrived in terms of the timetable, we have just changed, and we're running about 15 to 20 minutes behind, but we anticipate being able to make that up through the day a little bit. And maybe run at about 15 minutes behind at the end of the day. So hopefully that doesn't cause too much inconvenience. And I cannot recall which end I'm meant to go to, so okay. We're going to start with Commissioner Bond.
Thank you. I've got one question for you, and it's in the residential density area, Paris 4.7 to 4.20. And it's just that, could you give us a practical example of the kind of development Kaingaora might want to build in Invercargill that could meet the built form, servicing and amenity standards, but still be stopped, reduced or discouraged by the density per square metre rule?
Well, basically, if we're looking at doing anything with attached buildings, any duplexes or anything like that, we struggle to provide those as well. We have a simple model with redevelopment of our sites that we need to replace 1 with 3. And so if we can't do that with the current density standards, that's when we start to have to push things a bit. Otherwise, our financial modelling doesn't set us up for it. So it actually doesn't really take a lot to breach the density standards at the moment, especially if we're trying to provide a range of typologies on a site, including duplex and then also maybe a 3-bedroom or a bigger family home at the back of the section as well. Yeah.
Okay, this is to do first of all with glazing, which you've mentioned, but I'll just read the two questions I have with regard to that. So this is paragraphs 433 to 443. Kaingaora says that the 20% glazing rule could sometimes force awkward or poor design outcomes. Can you give us a practical example of when that might happen?
This has been a huge topic for us currently at the moment, especially with our new housing typologies and trying to balance everything, like I say, in the evidence. So this mainly comes out when you have a south loading site, because obviously if you have the front of the site is north facing, you don't really want to put all your your living spaces to the front, or the living spaces, other way around. So if you've got a south loading site, then you want all your living spaces to the north, and then you have in the front you've got the kitchen and that kind of stuff where your windows aren't as big. Where we've been finding some terrible outcomes, especially in Napier, not us, I'll state that, is a lot of people, we've been looking at using glass doors and things like that, and then frosting those over, because that provides ticks the box in terms of the 20% glazing rule, but the outcome is quite perverse in that case. Or trying to provide ranch sliders to the street as well, which also decreases privacy for people within in the living areas of their homes.
Thank you.
No worries.
If the 20% glazing rule was removed, what would make sure that homes still have good street-facing design, passive surveillance and an active street edge, especially for smaller developments that might not need a full design assessment?
That is a good question. I guess when you have all your other development performance standards combined, you'd hope that that would provide enough for those resource consent, those developments that don't need resource consent. So in cases of your front yard, your landscaping requirements, and your yard setbacks as well. Obviously, once you do trigger a consent, then you do obviously have the assessment criteria and the urban design guidelines that sit outside of the plan as well to provide that direction.
Thank you. And then with regard to universal design, acoustic privacy, Res 1AZ, are you still asking for universal design and acoustic privacy to be removed as matters council can consider? And what is your practical concern? Is it duplication with the Building Act, uncertainty, cost, or something else?
Probably all of the above, to be quite honest. Why? I mean, obviously, the universal design and acoustic privacy are obviously just assessment criteria, so aren't imposed as rules, which is obviously much better. For us, what we find with the universal design requirement is that even though it is an assessment criteria that may start to be pushed by the resource consents planners, we do unfortunately find this in Hamilton as an example, when you have larger sites and are providing a range of homes. The need or requirement to provide universal design on each site does increase cost, and providing additional space for ramps and all of that kind of stuff. So. And obviously, the Building Act also provides provides for that in cases where it is provided. So, in Kāinga-Ora's case, we do provide universal design where it is required. So, if we have a customer base that does require that, then that is obviously located within areas that is appropriate for them. So, just requiring or considering the need for universal design on a larger site in any area doesn't specifically mean that that's going to be provided to a person that requires it. So it's rather than having that focus within the plan, it's rather provided as a choice when you do provide development. In terms of the privacy, like acoustic privacy as well, that's pretty much the same. In terms of fencing and increasing cost around that. No worries.
So with regards to activity statuses, and after the Section 42A recommendations, can you just confirm for me that Kāinga-Ora's remaining concerns are around space around open buildings, which you did touch on in your summary there, but also permeable surfaces?
Yeah, the permeable surfaces, I think we could probably live with the 30%, to be honest. It just really comes down to the cumulative effect of all of those provisions and how that relates to being able to provide proper medium density development. I mean, the 20% obviously is the basic standard now, I guess, for medium density development. It's in the MDRS standards as well. So we would much prefer 20%, but it wasn't something that I highlighted in my evidence as that we would die on a hill for.
So for the remaining rules, why is discretionary status too restrictive?
I mean, basically, as I've said in my evidence, discretionary just really increases that risk profile quite considerably. When you have restricted discretionary framework and you have a set of assessment criteria, that gives you enough guidance and confidence to be able to meet those criteria and design your site to that. Once it kicks into discretionary, that opens up a whole range of considerations, which obviously lessens confidence when you're in a resource consent processing, when you're processing resource consents as well, and can also lengthen that process. It gives confidence to the officers as well to be able to give them guidance into what to do. I did want to comment on Ms. Spalding's comments around keeping it consistent with the rest of the plan. I don't consider that appropriate consideration really when you are doing a plan change and you are changing things to reflect that. So an RDA status is much more common as well across Aotearoa. And especially for things like your development and performance standards, you know what the effects of yards are, breaching a yard are, you know the effects of increasing your permeable areas and height and all that kind of stuff. So those effects are known, so therefore you can cater for them in matters of discretion.
So if I can turn to the residential 1A medium density zone and the rules 5 through to 7, 4 or more residences, matters of discretion, and that's in the 42A, pages 34 and 35. Are Kāinga Ora still seeking to preclude limited notification?
For over 3 dwellings, was it?
4 or more.
Yes, we would if all of the development performance standards were complied with in that instance. Yeah.
So what's the practical problem that notification creates?
It's risk again, especially for, well, I mean, even for private developers as well. It's the risk and cost and the timeline that it takes for you to get a consent. So if you're opening yourself up to limited or public notification, you're opening yourself up to scrutiny of the public, and that obviously increases the risk for getting your consent over the line. Specifically for us as Kāinga Ora, that obviously comes with a lot of scrutiny because of who we are as a social housing provider. So we generally do not go to a limited or public notification on our developments just because of that. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times we have gone to hearing where we have been quite confident that we could get it across the line.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, so comes to me now for just a couple of final questions. So I am quite keen to understand the same question that we fleshed out a little bit with Ms. Spalding, which is around if the layout of houses has actually been approved through either a land use consent or being assessed at the same time, then why does Kāinga Ora say that the minimum lot size does not add anything useful at subdivision stage? And from what I heard from Ms. Spalding is that the assessment is different, the effects are different, or certainly at this stage that's my understanding of the answer. So what do you consider?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify, obviously if you have a subdivision consent is still required. It'd be great if that was controlled activity. But it's the minimum net site area, which is what we are seeking to have taken away. Basically because obviously your yards, your outdoor space, all of those development performance standards have been considered to a notional boundary at the stage of land use. So when you put lines on a plan, the only thing you need to be assessing is your easements, your servicing to boundaries and to lots, and your access as well. So yeah, I think that's the only things you should be assessing at that point. All of the other matters have already been assessed as part of that land use. So that's where we're coming from.
Great, no, that's great clarification, thank you. It's come up in a couple of submissions about the housing register figures, and I understand that it's MSD who produced that list. And I just wanted to understand, your evidence seems to rely on there is strong demand for the 1 and 2 bedroom homes, and I wanted to understand, well, how do those figures get assessed, and are there any limitations in how that data is collected that we should keep in mind?
I wouldn't know the answer to that question, but I can get back to you, sorry.
That would be helpful, actually.
Yeah. That is definitely, done by MSD, so, and then it's given to us, so, and then we get a priority listing of, obviously people that are in higher need. That would be families with younger children or people that are rough sleeping. So that's what we look at. But yeah, in terms of the data and how that's collected, I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Right, but I guess my only question then for you would be, what's your level of confidence in relying on, what is the level of confidence that Kāinga Ora have in place in that data?
Quite significantly. I mean, that's how we plan our forward workload in terms of the pipeline of redevelopment.
Great. Thank you. My only last question is whether you've had the opportunity to have a look at Ms Spalding's appendum on the natural hazards, the Tay and Tweed area, and the council's more, I guess I'm testing with you, is that if council, the narrow response is adopted, which keeps the residential 1A applying, that parcel of land, applying the residential 1 density rules within that riverine inundation level 1 overlay, are you comfortable with that, or do you still oppose?
If I may clarify, is the flood levels for that, are they considered high risk, intolerable under the MPCNH, or?
So I might be able to answer that for you, just in terms of the evidence that we have before us. So we have Environment Southland's evidence that has reclassified it as medium to high risk, and this is a planning response to that evidence. And in Kāinga Ora's further submission, it's my read of it was opposing Environment Southland's request.
Where obviously the MPCNH has also come in, and our thinking is obviously moving fluidly. Where there is a medium risk, there obviously are opportunities to mitigate that risk, and that's also filtered through the MPCNH. So our consideration would be areas that are under medium risk and have tolerable a risk appetite, those should still remain 1A. If you do have a high risk area and the risk is intolerable, then downzoning would be considered appropriate.
Great, thank you. So the panel has no further questions. If you have any final comments you'd like to make, you're very welcome, but otherwise we appreciate your time and attending to our questions today.
I will just bring up one answer, just in terms of amenity, and obviously the response around considering the community's feedback around density, and your questions in terms of how do you maintain amenity as well. I'll just turn you to policy 6 of the MPSUD. That definitely does highlight that amenity does change over time. And that is not necessarily an effect in itself. So that's all. Cool. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wonder, sorry to interrupt, just before you release Ms Beneke, I just had a question, if I could ask via you.
Yes.
I don't want to cross-examine other people at all, but she did say that Kāinga Ora wanted to delete the glazing 20% requirement and in its place have an effects-based approach. And my question really, I was going to respond to that in reply, but I'm just wondering if you elaborate on what the effects-based approach would be, because that seems to create a discretionary regime which appears highly complex and uncertain. I just really, if that's what you mean.
No, what I meant was if we did get the rule of anything over 3 dwellings is restricted discretionary, that's when you would apply an assessment criteria to consider SIPTED and a consideration of views to street and glazing to street. That's what the intention of that paragraph was. Not to say that you would have a discretionary activity for glazing removal. Ms Spalding and I did have a bit of a discussion around it as well, and how you could consider that. I mean, if the glazing rule had to remain and at 20%, it would be great to see an assessment criteria to also build in that factor of considering other aspects such as the ones that I have mentioned, your privacy and thermal performance of your building, and then also landscaping and pathways two doors and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that does raise just a challenging position that we're in, and that we don't have that drafting in front of us of what would be an appropriate assessment, and we haven't had the opportunity to test that assessment with the experts. So that leaves us in a difficult position without that drafting being presented.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great, well, thank you so much. And now we will bring up Dr. McLaughlin and Mr. Scott for Te Whatu Ora. Right, well, while you're just settling in there, I thought I would just share what I shared with others, which is we really appreciate all submitters coming and taking their time and submitting on the whole process, being here today and talking to your submission. We have read all of the content, all written material we've read in advance. You're very welcome to have some opening comments. I think we've set aside half an hour. That's right, half an hour to talk to your submission. So we're in your hands, and saying that we have a number of questions, which is really just for us to better understand your evidence. But otherwise, we're in your hands, and you would have, I'm not quite sure if you were here at the very opening of Kāinga Ora. So I also, the panel's made an offer to say if you cannot answer any question that we have today, then you are very welcome to take a couple of days to provide a written response. So just indicate that and let us know if you prefer that option. But of course, that's all on public record, and it goes onto the website, and it'll be available for everybody as part of the process to read and understand. So it needs to be kept within scope of the answers to the questions that we ask. Great, so now we're in your hands if you'd like to do a brief presentation. Oh, actually, the secret is it's automatic, but you have to pull the microphone right up very close to you, and it is a bit intimidating to have it right in front of you, but it starts automatically.
Does it? Oh,
there you go.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou, and good morning everyone. Thanks so much for allowing us the opportunity to come in. I'm Virginia McLaughlin, Local Medical Officer of Health, and this is Tom Scott, one of our senior policy officers that's based in Dunedin. I'm hoping that I can give you back some time, to be quite honest, because our submission really, we're supportive of what's proposed. We think having an increased density in the more inner city area is for the Invercargill. Really, we were wanting to reinforce the importance of having the concept of universal design in the policy documents and supporting guide. I don't necessarily want to get into that because I'm not a planning expert, so I want to make that quite clear to everybody. But with all this discussion, I think it's really important to consider the actual people that may be living in any residences that are developed. Sometimes we can get focused on the planning and forget the people. So we were just really wanting to come in and say, for developments that have smaller housing in terms of bedrooms, the ageing population becomes, quite a group that we can look at within this. So I just really wanted to go over some of the stats. You're probably familiar with them, but I think it's always good just to have a little recap. So if someone...
If you turn it 180 so that the thick part of the dongle is faced, there you go.
Right. Bingo.
Okay, we're off. So just so you're aware, we're a growing city in Invercargill. Okay, we're 58,000 people at the moment, and our median age is currently 40 years compared to 38.1 for New Zealand. Our number of families currently from the 2023 3 census. Certainly, in terms of our Maori demographic, we have always need to keep that in consideration. Next. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
It works on a volume-based system, so when you get quiet, it doesn't hear you.
Okay, lovely. Okay, well, sorry about that. I'll get the hang of it just as I leave, probably. Yep. Okay, and then just, I'm sorry about this graph, it's very busy, but if you look at our ageing population, really from 65 years and over, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the last 6 bars, you'll see in there's a little green stripe. That's the New Zealand number for those particular age groups and how we compare. So in terms of a percentage, so you'll see that for each of those age groups, certainly we have got an ageing population. So that's just something to be aware of. Next slide, please. We can see in this one...
Hang on, Virginia.
Oh, no.
There we go.
We can see in this one, this is the percentage of the population with at least one activity limitation by age. And we can certainly see for New Zealand, again, the green bar, and for Invercargill, the solid, dark blue. So we can see for all of those, we're slightly higher. So we have got a population here. Just remember the numbers are small. Sometimes percentages can create sometimes that you think, oh, shock horror, but the numbers are there, so we're slightly higher than New Zealand. Now, the next slide, please.
Oh, hang on.
No.
Backwards.
And again, a busy slide, but this is again just the population projections over time. And if you skip down to the bottom row, 2053, you can see population by age group. It's split into our young people, our middle-aged people, and our older people. And if you look at the last column, 65 plus, you'll see if you run your eye down, it's a gradual increase over time. And we expect that to happen because as a whole, New Zealand's population is ageing, a consequence of the baby boomers who are now in about that 62 to 80 year age group. So we'll continue to see an ageing trend. So have we got any other slides or is that, that's it. So we were just really wanting to put some context around from my basic understanding, universal design, the concept's really important because it looks at all ages and stages and needs, rather than just looking at ramps or specific things. So it's really looking at who may go into the cultural ramifications, ability needs, ageing needs. So just trying to actually put a health and wellbeing perspective on it. So that's really all from to take. Hope they're not too hard, otherwise we have to take them away.
So you said it, thank you very much for the presentation, and you said at the beginning that not being a planner, you probably don't want to get into the specifics of whether it's suited best an objective or a policy or a whereabouts. It just needs to be presented. But Mr. Scott, you're being a policy advisor. Are we able to ask those types of questions of you? Do you want to give them your best stab or prefer not?
Probably not. I mean, from our perspective, I think the biggest thing is ensuring that universal design is plan-enabled. And as planners, I'm sure you know how to do that.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Well, we won't ask any specific questions in on whether it's best placed on objectives or policies or whereabouts, but we do have some questions that are more about the information that you've provided in health needs. So
following on from that then, with universal design, can we be clear, is the outcome that you're looking for that it's required in every case, or that just it's clearly considered when we're looking at medium density?
We'll see if we agree on this one. I think any building design, whether it's the building, the space around it, transit ways, that's the inclusiveness, as I understand, of universal design. If it's set up well in terms of, generational change, then it should serve people well over the longer term. That's my understanding. Yeah.
I mean, universal design is not just for people with disabilities, it's also very useful for people pushing prams, for example. And certainly it will not do any harm to those that aren't in that space.
So earlier, Kāinga Ora said that universal design's better addressed under the Building Act. So is it the response of Te Whatu Ora that while the Building Act may deal with parts of accessibility, the district plan is where we deal with matters like site layout, building placement, access, outdoor space and the like?
Yes and no. I mean, it may be dealt with by the Building Act, but the reality is that only certain aspects of universal design are actually deployed. There are other components that are components of universal design that aren't routinely employed, and it's really ensuring that those matters are considered and addressed.
Thank you.
I have a very general question for you. It says, for those who are not public experts, health experts like myself, what is the main thing you want the panel to understand about the connection between housing design, ageing, disability and health outcomes in Whakaako?
Look at the opportunity to make that design not just a building. Context within that building sits. So, I don't. Ensuring that people can access it easily, depending on what life stage they are, what their needs are. It's not just the building, but it's surrounding the building. Cycleways, paving, to make it really user-friendly, and we get the best out of that building, however it's configured, and the surround.
Now, I've also just got a couple of general questions, and the first one is really, it's just a matter of helping me understand. When you refer to activity limitations, what does that mean in real life for people trying to get into, move around or stay living in their homes? You refer to disabilities, but can I tease a bit more out of you with that?
Just Paul, yours, if you don't mind. You will get used to it by the end. Thank you.
You have to give me a mic next time. But the activity limitation may be that the person is unsteady on their feet and they need support. It may be that in terms of that activity, it just prevents them physically from doing what they would normally do.
Okay, and then my other general question is, and it is just a general one, your evidence refers to ageing in place, downsizing and the limited availability of suitable smaller homes in Southland. Can you explain how those points fit together and why they matter for medium density housing? Just whatever answer you see.
So basically, in terms of healthy ageing, it's great if people can age in place. Sometimes people have difficulty ageing in place if the property's too big for them and they're too far away from services. You know, there'll be other considerations as well as where their family is and all the rest. So that's where the ageing comes into it. depending on how this development unfolds in your target group, I mean, to be honest, from a personal point of view, I've come into this area fresh. I wasn't looking for a big house, okay, I was looking for something small, but the competition for the small houses really pushed the price up. So we've ended up with a 4x2, which is really too big for us. So there's, a lot of considerations in this. It's about choice. What do our people want? There may be some business people that prefer a smaller unit. There may be, we know that there's a requirement from the older population that requires smaller residents. That's safe, secure, well heated, well constructed, good access to services. So this potential proposed development ticks a lot of those boxes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you for adding in your lived experience, your anecdotal evidence, because it actually is helpful. So thank you for that. I only have one point, and it's more understanding that in your written evidence you refer to 2 and 3 bedroom homes being relevant to ageing in place. But what I think I've heard, and so it's just to make sure that I understand, you're talking about a preference for ageing in place would be 1 and 2 bedroom homes rather than 2 and 3 bedroom homes?
I don't think I can confirm exactly about the size. I'd have to, seek information, I think, from the people in the right place.
Right. Okay, thank you. We've now finished with our questions, so if there's any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with us, please do so, but otherwise we appreciate the time that you've taken to come in and share your perspective and your written material. But feel free if you've got anything else to add.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I mean, I think the ageing population's an important consideration, as are all segments of our population. And this is outside really the gamut of this particular forum, but I do. But that aside, always available to discuss any issues. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
As a side note, it is something that we've been acutely aware of for at least the last 15 years.
Yeah, so although outside the scope of this panel, you've got 3 councillors sitting in the room who have just heard you, so, and many council staff. So
should start really lobbying, shouldn't we?
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now we have Ms. DeWall.
One more to your right, please, just one more chair to your right. Yeah, just because the microphone's turned off in the seat that you sat down in.
Right, thank you. And Ms. DeWall, just before you start, what we've been saying to all submissions today is, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time and effort to engage in the process, provide your written submission and come along today to speak to your submission. We really appreciate, as a panel, everybody's time they've taken. We have read your submission and there's no need for you to go through any of that in detail, but you're very welcome to speak to us about the key points that you want us to hear, have any opening comments, and then we will have questions. The questions are very much just to understand your perspective, engage in our understanding of your submission. They're designed to help us understand you and your view. If there's a question that we ask of you, and they won't be technical, from no technical questions.
Thank you.
But if there is anything that we ask of you that you go, actually, I would like just a little bit more time to think about that and come back to you, you're very welcome to do that. We're asking for any of those types of requests to be completed by Friday. However, it's really important that they stay within the scope of your submission and they only answer the question that we ask. And that's up to you to take that opportunity, but otherwise we would appreciate you answering those questions today, but we're very keen to make sure that you have a great experience here and an opportunity to share your perspective. So please go ahead, we're in your hands.
Thank you for this participation in the hearing, and I fully support the council plan change, and I stand by what I write in the submission file. And the additional details that I want to include was I have lived in the south part, and I lived in residential 1 also, and I find lots of houses already have subdivision and resource consent application, and most of them are already subdividing the land and lots of houses creating. And there are a few houses that doesn't have fund or money to rebuild the house or create a new house beside their backyard. And because of new subdivision, they start getting surface flooding and they can't do anything. And it's really a shame that those people have to pay extra fee just to get the resource consent for residential density lowering. And I just want to support that fact to help in future if they decide or if they choose not to do, and I support anyways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now come to some questions. So we'll start with Commissioner Bond, her questions.
Thank you. Mine are just very general questions. What type of housing do you think is missing in Invercargill? Do you think that it's smaller homes, newer homes, lower maintenance homes?
I think Invercargill is really good place where people have their open green area and their house, beautiful parking, but there is something missing. That's warm house, old houses getting less restructure, and new people, renters, anyone have to adapt all the old houses. I mean, the aesthetic, the housing condition is like 80 years old. And we have lived in modern house where we don't have to think of that level and behind. And if they have a provision to build a new house where they be more warm and they have adequate space, not too much space to take care of, and not less space also. So I would like Invercargill people to have the choice. If they want to have open space, they can. If they don't want, if they don't like to be in open space, then they can rebuild to more something they like.
That's great. So in your submission, you refer to older homes and that they are more costly in maintenance and limited on their returns. Mm-hmm. Can you just tell me what that means in terms of practical elements?
Okay, so I just give my example.
Yes.
I'm living with 6 family members, and my house is like nearly 100 years old. And just to put extra toilet, I have to pay 40,000 just for quotation, and there might be other hidden costs. And just to change windows, I already paid 35,000. And just for basic things, just to keep me warm and my family warm. And I've never thought of building extra house behind my backyard because because of the 400 residential limitation, and I don't have money to pay 20,000 for the land use surveyor to pay. So for those people, I'm standing for those people.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. My question sort of builds on to that, and it's also, you've already said things, but it's understanding, we'd like the panel to understand what you think about a housing choice in Invercargill that might not come through the technical reports. Now, you have touched on that, but is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I am new on hearing panels, so I don't have much idea. I have researched a little bit, and based on my studies, I think with new residential report that I read by Kaingora Environment Southland and Tifata Ora, I like how they have clearly written more information, and as a public, it's hard for me to read and understand everything. So I can't think much at now.
How difficult was it for you to try and find suitable housing here?
It was really hard because as a parent, I have to think for the school zone and everything and health, and it's hard to find doctors, it's hard to find dental, it's hard to find good school. And if there's more scope of residential, there might be more school, more opportunities of health, and it might bring up new prospect for future kids and future generation, that they don't have to live what we have suffered. And I'm not saying that in Invercargill I suffered much. I like Invercargill, but basically those regulation and policies, if we have better option for public plus other people, then that would be great.
So if we had that increased diversity in the types of houses that were available, smaller houses, medium density houses, new and warm homes, what difference do you think that would make for people like you who are trying to find somewhere to live?
Sorry, I got.
No.
But I think there will be opportunities for more the tradies role. There's more opportunities, and we don't have to get quotation from the monopoly authorities, like for windows or for just to make house. It's more expensive, but there might be more market coming inside in Invercargill. There might be wider prospect of not relying on one source or provider. So that's all.
Thank you.
Right, well, thank you. I don't have any questions. I think that we've well covered all of the aspects of your submission. So you're very welcome to have any closing comments, and if you don't, that's fine. We'll just take the time to say thank you very much for all of the time answering our questions. We appreciate it. Do you have anything further you'd like to say?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the next submitter that we have is Mr. Ibbotson and he's appearing on Teams.
Yes, so I've just let him in from the lobby. I don't see him appearing yet. Russell, can you hear me even if I can't see you?
And I note we're caught up. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so well done.
How about now, Russell? Pat, we might need some support from IS, please. Let him in the lobby, the same as we did last time.
We have a little bit of time, so we will take the time to get the IT working, particularly because we want to use the full 30 minutes with Environment Southland.
Russell, if you can hear us, please just bear with us. We're just asking IT to come take a look at this. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, it'll be a continuing thing because there's a series of submissions and it's just,
Okay.
it's coming up to my time, so.
We can hear you a little bit, Mr. Ibbotson. Do you have your camera turned on?
You think it's on?
It's on. You see how it keeps But maybe they've got PMI. I just got places to fire, can we get a bit closer to look at this?
All right, we'll just hold on, Mr. Ibbotson, as it would be great if we could see you while you're being able to join us.
They've got their mic on mute, I think. As it says council chambers, and then you'll see that there's a little mic with a slash through it. So I think that means that they've got themselves on mute at the moment. They might just do that until you're ready to get going.
Okay, so do you think?
But your mic is off. Like your mic is like they can hear you.
Okay,
So
so
you,
my mic.
you're not muted.
Mr. Ibbotson, if you can hear me, we're just waiting on some IT to come make sure so that we can actually see you on the screen so that our commissioners are able to speak with you.
You can just.
Yes, good morning. I can see you.
I'm glad you can see us. We would love to see you, and if you bear with us for a few moments, we have a member of the governance team walking over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ibbotson. Kia ora, Mr. Ibbotson. Can you still see us?
Yes, I can. Thank
Perfect.
You.
We can now see you, so I will hand it over to Madam Chair. Take it away.
Thanks so much for your patience as we work through that. Mr. Ibbotson, I just will share with you what I've shared with all submitters who have appeared before us today. This panel wants to take the time to thank each submitter for putting the time into this planning process, for preparing your written material and also for appearing today. We have read all of the written material, so you don't need to take us through that word by word. What we'd really appreciate from you is to focus on the key points that you want the panel to understand, especially any changes that you want made to the provisions or any disagreement on the council recommendations. Our questions are all designed to help us understand your position. So if we require a bit more time, you think that you need some more time to express some points to us, please take that and let us know. We do have a number of questions. Each of the panel has some questions to ask you, but for now, we're in your hands. This is your time to submit to us. You have 15 minutes, but you're welcome to take longer or a bit longer. The only other thing is we have said to council experts and submitters that if we ask a question that you're unable to answer today, particularly if it's a technical question, then you are welcome to have a couple of days to reply to us in writing. That reply does need to stay within the scope of the question that we ask and your submissions, and also becomes a public record, so it will go up to the website and everybody as part of the process will have the opportunity to see that. But otherwise, welcome. Thank you very much for being here, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to make submission via the video link as opposed to travelling down in person. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Council for their forward look and recognising the need to revise matters in terms of the new change, particularly in relation to the greater intensity of the residential 1A zone. Now, by way of background, I represent IPI Properties, who is a major player in the proposed 1A zone, or recognised 1A zone, in that they own a very large number of properties and are in a position to make a substantial difference in providing a lot of new energy efficient homes in the area. To date, the company has invested something like, it's a very substantial amount, $20 million in South Invercargill, in upgrading a lot of houses and a number of new developments. It's not an easy situation because I think, as the panel will appreciate, South Invercargill has a very large number of old houses. Many of these houses are 100 years old, have a high maintenance factor, and are very expensive to actually upgrade on an economic basis. There's also ongoing problems, regrettably, in terms of the tenant mix, particularly in this day and age where there's a lot more economic pressures. But unfortunately, the realities are with older houses, there's difficulties in attracting high quality tenants. And there's numerous problems in South Invercargill with a failure of tenants to make payment of rent, damage to houses, and generally a lot of additional maintenance requirements, largely because of any house 100-year-old is going to take a lot more maintenance. I think the argument for greater density is well spelt out, and I think it's particularly relevant. It does, in the 1A zone, it does utilise existing services, which makes sense, as opposed to new outlying greenfields development. There's a housing shortage in Invercargill, and that's well recognised, and there's a need to provide for new housing and also retirees. One of the key things here is to better utilise the land because there's a large number of sections in South Invercargill in the 1A zone that are 1,000 square metres, quarter acre. And this creates major problems at the moment because the tenants are not interested in maintaining those sections. It puts extra pressure on landlords on trying to keep them up to scratch, and it's not a good look all round. One of the limitations in trying to develop in Invercargill, and particularly South Invercargill, is the cost of building. The cost of building is escalating rapidly. And the difficulty any developer has in Invercargill, particularly South Invercargill, is that the cost of building is the same, if not more, than other areas in New Zealand because of the freight aspect. But the realities in terms of financial availability and attractiveness for a developer, the end product of the development is, and the housing cost is much lower than our square. So you've got a higher housing cost of construction, but you've got a lower end result in terms of value. There needs to be an incentive to developers to try and encourage to make it worthwhile. The cost of upgrading 100-year houses is at best marginal. There can be significant delays. We've currently got one project at the moment that IPI Properties have done, and it's carried on for virtually 3 years trying to get through. It was a major renovation, but the time involved and the cost of absorbing that time, interest on outlay, etc., is very considerable, and it does affect the attractiveness of doing it. The solution, there's no easy solution, but one of the best solutions, and this is the focus of IPI Properties submission, they're in a position where they could create 60 or 70 new houses in the 1A zone close to the city. The issue is the cost of development, which to a large extent is governed by the size of the house. We need to get cost effectiveness in housing. We need to look at smaller houses, not large houses, because the cost is relative to a square metre basis, and the larger the house, the greater the cost, which creates an unaffordably difficult aspect for retirees who don't need a large house, and also first home owners. IPI Properties has a subsidiary company that is involved in the importation of modular housing frames from China. This can be done on a very cost-effective basis. The houses are then erected off-site using New Zealand materials to a large degree, New Zealand subcontractors, so they meet the current standards. And that is probably the key to trying to create something which is affordable to downsizing retirees and also first home owners. It's a smaller, more cost-effective, highly energy-efficient house. And this can be provided by the model that IPI subsidiary company has to do this. The certification and compliance is largely done off-site, so the houses are delivered fully certified, and that overcomes major problems and delays with numerous visits in trying to achieve the building process, which is simply not viable in South Invercargill in many instances because the risk is too high for the return. The idea is to probably, in creating these smaller, low energy, highly efficient houses, does come back to size. A 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom standard model can be looked at with something like a footprint of 9 by 6, say 54 square metres, or up to 70 square metres. The cost difference is considerable compared to a turnkey operation from scratch. Now, the key to this situation, and it's probably one of the main thrusts of the IPI submission, there is an anomaly that's cropped up with the granny flat legislation, which does open up a number of advantages in terms of encouraging more housing, because as of right, it's possible to erect a granny flat, which is a rather broad terminology and perhaps a bit misleading in terms of the title. But the issue is, and where it's considered there is a serious anomaly at the moment, is the coverage, site coverage, because it's possible on, say, a 600 square metre section to erect a house, one large house of 240 square metres, which is a large house. That gives within the 40 or 45% site coverage and leaves 60% plus as open space, which is important. Now, what IPI properties consider should be as part of this review of the residential waste 1A section is to look at the situation and work on the overall coverage factor. Now, to highlight that situation, on a 600 square metre section, say of 54 square metres, which could incorporate a 2 or 3 bedroom, highly efficient house, you could erect 3 separate units, which would still give a less than 30% coverage, which means that the open space is even more than the minimum situation. So the logic of that argument is that it surely makes better sense to focus on the open space, a requirement. And if one can get greater housing density on a single dwelling level, as opposed to high-rise construction, because high-rise construction is all very well to achieve greater density, but it comes with a number of social problems, and it's particularly evident in areas where we see developing London, especially slum conditions, etc., of high-rise housing. Whereas if one can look at greater density on a ground level with the open space, it provides a much more attractive environment for social, recreational needs, children being able to relate to a separate private area, etc. So it does seem to be an anomaly at the moment that the number of dwellings per section is restricted to 1 per 400 square metres, and that is not helping the density, the incentive of developers, because it would not be viable for IPI properties to develop those 60 or 70 houses unless they can do it on the situation of the open space level, which should apply over the whole site rather than limiting it to 1 house per 400 square metres, which is not effective in terms of, I suppose, best resources. So effectively, I think the issue comes back, and it's the IPI situation is probably a very good example because the company could look at creating 60 or 70 new highly efficient dwellings on land that they currently own. But they would not look at doing it for conventional housing because the cost is too high and the risk is increased accordingly. The cost of these smaller houses is a lot more efficient, very, very energy efficient, and it means it can provide a effective space situation for retirees who have their own dwelling at an affordable price, and I do emphasise the affordable price because it's so much less, and even first home buyers who want to get a step on the property ladder. So I think the main thrust then of IPI submission again is that the council review the 1 house per 400 square metre and adopt the current policy of the coverage, whether it be 40 or 45%, leaving the open space. And it seems logical if one wants to create more dwellings in newer dwellings in South Invercargill. And I think the fact that one of the best ways of improving the whole the image of South Invercargill is to create more dwellings, more new dwellings, which will lift the standard. It gives a better quality of life for tenants, and it seems a major anomaly that you can have on a 600 square metre, one large 240 square metre house, and yet you could have 3 54 square metre energy efficient dwellings which could provide for 2 or 3 bedrooms. So I think that's the probably main thrust. IPI properties have got to look at the, like any business, as a effective business model or situation. And quite frankly, it makes more sense to look at development in high growth areas such as Wanaka, Queenstown or Cromwell, where your return, the entry price is higher, but the value of your property is so much greater. And that's the difficulty that exists in Invercargill. Cost of building is higher, but the finished product value is lower. And therefore, that does not create such an attractive situation to developers in South Invercargill, particularly because I think we have a different situation in North Invercargill, where the average property price is so much more. So I think that probably covers my main thrust. I urge that the councillors or the council, in looking at the whole 1A, does review this situation in terms of allowing the number of dwellings based on the open space provision and not on one house per 400 square metres, which, as I say, would not be attractive to IP properties in looking at developing any of the, I think they have 40 or 50 properties at the moment in the 1A zone. And they're currently looking very seriously at the wisdom of even upgrading a lot of these older houses because the cost and the compliance and the delays. And it is very difficult to upgrade a 100-year-old house unless you can see an attractive value at the end of it. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair, and I trust that, again, I thank the Council for their forward-looking approach in trying to develop the 1A, and particularly the South Invercargill area, which has its challenges. And yes, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your very comprehensive oral submission that supports your written submission. Thank you. And I note your overall supportive position for making more enabling framework for development. And a number of the questions that we will focus on will not be those in support, or will probably be testing out the issues around those areas that you think that there needs to be changes to the provisions to be more enabling. However, before I turn to my fellow commissioners here to ask questions, I'm just going to open with a couple for you. But one of them is just to bring you up to speed on a technical matter with your further submission, and that is in your further submission, in the IPI further submission, there was an additional request to look at the rules for the rear section accessway to become narrower from a 3.5 metre wide access to a 3 metre access. And earlier today we asked legal counsel whether there was scope for us to consider that, given that the only submission we had from that was from FENZ that sought wider access. So I wanted just to bring that to your attention, that we are considering whether we have scope to consider that, but we might still have some questions on that whilst we're still working through that scope issue. That was just the first point I wanted to bring to your attention. And then I just have two questions for myself that have arisen from what you've said. And I want to make sure that I understand. When you talked about single stories rather than building up, and I wanted to understand from an Invercargill market perspective. We've had evidence from Te Whatu Ora earlier today about the ageing population of Invercargill and why smaller units are potentially more attractive for that population. Have you thought or got any information on whether the market is seeking more single story here rather than multi-story?
No, I don't have any direct information on that one. I simply see it that a single story can create a more attractive environment, social-wise and otherwise, because you can have the direct open space requirement, which is the 3.5 circle, I think, which is a very good requirement, and it's very important to enable the maximum use of the outdoor space, whereas high-rise development simply doesn't have that, and it does seem to fly in the face, to some extent, of the importance of recognising the open space for a better standard of social and enjoyment, family living, etc.
Great, thank you so much for that. My only other question is, earlier today we had some anecdotal evidence about somebody wanting to purchase here in Invercargill, and they said that when they were looking for a smaller home, there was not enough supply, so it drove the price of smaller homes higher. And I wanted to know from your perspective as a developer in this area, does that align with what you're experiencing, higher prices for smaller dwellings?
It's true to some extent, because you've got the basic high price, I suppose, issues in any house with the kitchen and bathroom, etc., where the services in any house, they are a higher cost component. But I think the advantage that IPI Properties has is that they are able to create smaller dwellings at a much reduced price as opposed to conventional dwelling, because they're importing framework and certain components from China, which is very cost effective, and the whole structure, I mean, these are not boxes, they're a attractive looking dwelling, but they can be put on site for a much lower price than conventional building, which, as I stated, if you start from scratch, you're looking at probably $4,000 a square metre, and I would indicate, well, I'd suggest that we could put an actual house, putting the land value on aside, for probably something more like $2,500 a square metre. So there is a very definite price advantage on the type of construction with modular homes, and it also speeds up the whole process because they come fully consented, and therefore there's not the situation. One development we've recently done, which has been going on for almost 3 years, there's been about 6 different building inspectors that have all got involved in it. And it's not the council's fault, it's just the whole compliance situation is making it very, very difficult, and it all adds to the cost of conventional building.
Right, thank you for that. Now I'll turn to our other commissioners. So we'll start with Commissioner Ludlow.
Thanks for your submission and feedback on the plan change proposal, Mr. Robertson. Just wanting to clarify, are you asking for the density controls to be removed entirely, or for more flexibility where the built form and open space and servicing and amenity are acceptable?
Yes, no, good question. I'm certainly making very clear that I think the open space provisions should remain. It's simply a question of being able to, reducing the size of a house, you can still achieve or even better, the existing open space requirements, because you've got 3 houses that are equivalent to one large, say 2,500 square foot house. So in other words, no, I'm not suggesting the open space change at all. I'm simply saying that it should be a dominant factor in assessing the situation with putting dwellings on a site, rather than saying you can only have one house per every 400 square metres, which simply doesn't work in terms of looking at a lot of development in South Invercargill.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. Can you give us an example practically of the kind of site or development that would work commercially if more units were allowed but might not work under the current density rules as proposed?
Yes, sorry, I'm looking, for instance, at a 1,000 square metre or even a 500 square metre section, and IPI Properties does have a lot of 1,000 square metre sections. Some of them are sitting there idle at the moment, growing grass and looking untidy and continual maintenance, because it's a question of trying to look at developing them, making them on a viable, profitable basis. So, yeah, I think it does come back to the basic economics, the cost of a dwelling, the viability of it, and the risk factor to the developer. And the key issue does come back to the fact that it stacks up economically to look at smaller, energy efficient new housing, which can be viable. It then meets the market that we need for retirees, and also gives, if one can create a 2 or 3 bedroom house, it also gives first homeowners the chance to get into a brand new, highly energy efficient house at an affordable price. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure that I exactly addressed the issue that you raised there, Councillor.
It gives me a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Robertson.
Right, and thank you. Commissioner Bond and Commissioner Boyle have just confirmed to me that your comprehensive oral submissions have answered the questions that they had pre-prepared. So thank you for that. And I don't have any further questions either. So I just welcome you now. If you've got any final comments you would like to make, you're very welcome to make them. But otherwise, just wanted to say thank you on behalf of this panel and the council for making your submission and taking the time. But over to you if you have anything finally you'd like to add.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd re-emphasise the fact affordability. South Invercargill is not an easy area. It needs new development to lift the whole social standard there, new housing. And to get new housing, it's got to be affordable. And the only way that you can make that work is by having greater density of smaller houses, which are quite suitable and meet the needs of retirees who do not need a lot of space, and also perhaps first homeowners who starting off just wanting to get into a new house that is has all the advantages. So I think probably I've probably laboured the point in terms of trying to emphasise what could be achieved on the sections that we own, but it's got to be attractive. And under the current rules, unless we can see more than one dwelling per 400 square metres, and it's based on the coverage factor, then it's not economical for us to even look at doing anything further.
Right, thank you.
I think that.
Great, thank you for that. And just to let you know that, so on the panel, we do have the 3 councillors. I'm an out-of-towner, so this afternoon, we'll be spending quite a bit of time driving around and getting familiar with the site, so we'll be able to actually see what you've described. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right, and now we will move on to our final submitter of the day, which is Environment Southland and Mr. Roy. This one over for the speakers. Great, thank you. Just while you're just settling in and getting everything together, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your patience. We're running about 16 minutes behind, so appreciate your patience with that. Also, you would have heard that the panel has taken the time to say thank you to all the submitters for the written materials, engaging in the process and attending today, and we appreciate that. You would have heard also that we have read all of the pre-distributed written material, so you don't need to go through that word by word. We're really keen for you to cover your key points, and of course we have quite a few questions for you because we do want to really understand the natural hazards part of your submission quite well, and all of your submission, but in particular that. We will have questions for you, and if it's decided that there needs to be a little bit more time, we will take it to make sure that we understand the information. We have available over here Lisa, who can point to mapping, and I think that will be particularly helpful as we work through Environment Southland's submission. But in the meantime, we are over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora. Marcus Roy is my name, so I'm the Strategy and Policy Manager at Environment Southland. And I'll give a bit of a précis of my submission and evidence. Not look to dwell too long on the points we agreed with, but I understand that we're keen to get into the natural hazard. So effectively, I want to make one amendment to the evidence circulated, and that's paragraph 20. The last two words need to be deleted. So effectively, the natural hazard assessment risk for the area identifies it as a medium risk, not medium to high. So I want to make that, I'll put that on the record at the start of the process, just so that the rest of the evidence is canvassed around that point. But effectively, I've also read all the 42A report, the amendment issued on the 12th of May, and the legal submissions on behalf of City Council prepared by Mr. Garbutt in preparation for the hearing. So I'm sure you understand Environment Southland's role. So primarily, we seek that plan changes align with the Southland Regional Policy Statement, and a particular focus of that is avoiding and mitigating the effects of natural hazards. So the scope of the submission evidence, we support urban intensification of the residential 1A zone, as it utilises the latent infrastructure capacity within the existing piped infrastructure networks. And we're supportive of high quality urban growth and building orientation that supports energy efficiency, housing and solar energy gain. So we have opposed the intensification of residential development in areas identified in the Riverine Inundation Level 1 overlay, particularly between Tay and Tweed streets, as is subject to potential inundation from the Opuni stream. So key points of my evidence, just want to highlight around the relevance of the National Policy Statement for Natural Hazards, particularly the direction to manage risk proportionately. Environment Southland view is that the assessment of the natural hazard risk as undertaken by technical staff within the organisation identifies the risk as medium under the new matrix of the National Policy Statement, and the National Direction recommends avoiding or mitigating risk in a manner that is proportionate to the level of risk. So I want to highlight that. In the Regional Policy Statement, it seeks to avoid significant risk and mitigate other risk around natural hazards and take a precautionary approach. And want to also note that there's likely to be increasing severity of risk anticipated over time as climate change impacts are realised, and design parameters of the flood bank, and there are design parameters associated with the flood bank adjoining the Otapuni stream. So it creates a level of uncertainty around the time frame and risk profile over successive generations. So overall view of the evidence and the position of Environment Southland is that the Riverine Inundation Level 1 overlay should not have a more enabling rule framework, and therefore enable higher density of residential dwellings to be established. Well, we're supportive of the amendment issued on the 12th of May and the legal submissions. I consider there's a couple of points probably to work through in relation to those key aspects. And the first one of those was a potential inconsistency creeping into their district plan, particularly policy natural hazard 8. So I'll talk to that and work through that with you. Effectively, that seeks to avoid urban intensification within the verbatim for you, so you've got it on hand. So natural hazard policies 8, to avoid subdivision in hazard-prone areas where this would lead to intensification of development that would exacerbate the consequence of the natural hazard. So just conscious that this section of the plan is out of scope for this plan change, but it's set a quite clear direction around how it seeks to deal with urban intensification in natural hazard zone locations. So the rule framework coming out of this plan change, in my view, should be making sure that it's connected and giving effect to that policy as well. So any sort of reduction in density or any reduction in the rule framework, thereby increasing intensification, potentially could have a conflict with that policy. So seeking to, I guess, outline that. I don't have any real quick solutions, but note that the proposed amendments on the 12th of May indicate the rule change from discretionary to restricted discretionary. So there's a potential more enabling activity status being established through the plan as drafted. Second piece was around trigger points for restricted discretionary consent. Just wondering, and it's probably more of a practice around how the plan is implemented. Is there a trigger point for consent at the time of subdivision that deals with the density and the establishment of a dwelling within the new lot being created? Or is there a subsequent land use consent required after the fact the subdivision is issued, and how those two trigger points, whether you need two consents and trying to not, I guess, approve the subdivision, and then it becomes a situation where you apply for building consent and you can't build a house on it because the lot's already created. So making sure the connection between the point of subdivision and the point of development are connected, so that if the subdivision gets through, then there's no uncertainty around the development rights associated with that new land being created for residential use. So it's just, if there's we don't want to create lots, sell the lot to somebody else, they buy the lot expecting they can build a house, and then all of a sudden they have to go through additional resource consent and go, hold on, it's in a natural hazard zone, oh, that means I can't build. So you want to prevent that from occurring from a good practice and planning perspective. Third thing I want to raise, and it's probably just more around the guidance around how if the rule proposed amendments as circulated on the 12th of May are to remain, there's a risk of natural hazards matter of discretion in Rule 8. I'm just wondering how the implementation of that would roll out in terms of the practice and guidance associated with managing natural hazard risk, whether an applicant would need to go through a natural hazard risk assessment at cost, and whether that would create a barrier to, okay, then now consent is declined, and setting up a situation where it's a matter of discretion where you must consider it as part of your decision-making framework for the development, whether the risk profile comes out to say it should not be approved, then is there a way to prevent that through the rule construct, to prevent someone getting into that space where you go down a path of getting an expensive report prepared, go through the process, and the risk profile is too high and therefore you can't build on it? How can we manage the rules in a way that prevents us leading someone down that path to potentially not getting a successful outcome with their application? So it's probably more the guidance around implementation of how that rule could play out in practice as an applicant going through that process. You don't want to invest time and money and energy into a consent that may not actually come out being approved due to the natural hazard risk. Should we, as a solution, potentially make that natural hazard risk a discretionary activity or a higher activity status to try and carve that out or signal it earlier on than a restricted discretionary status? So there's a wee bit of probably planning technical stuff in there that I've just dropped on your planner, so I apologise for that. So it's effectively around our support of the general direction of the amendment coming out on the 12th of May, but presume there'll be a number of questions coming out of my presentation.
Yes, so no, that's really helpful that you engage with the addendum evidence in the way that you have, because I think one of the questions was going to be, obviously, what do you think of it? And now you've gone into quite a bit of detail telling us what you think of it, which will be very helpful for Ms. Spalding in her being able to provide her written reply in response to the issues that you raise. Yeah, particularly around whether or not it is actually more enabling in light of the NH Policy 8 and the other matters that you've talked about. It would be really helpful to get some for our reporting officer to respond to those matters. I'll just check though. It appeared to me that you were not reading from some pre-prepared written material for speaking notes, but instead speaking off the cuff. Is that, if you do have pre-prepared speaking notes, it would be helpful, but if you don't, all good, it's on record.
Yeah, I do have some prepared speaking notes, but
Okay.
they are reasonably rough and relatively swiftly prepared. So they're probably not a fulsome response. Effectively, it was
Right.
a bit of a mixture of written notes and off the cuff, but happy to provide a copy of my rough notes to the panel too.
Well, if you're comfortable, then we would appreciate it. Yes, please. I think we did have a number of questions on the appendum and the new rule, but given what you've just spoken through, which was quite thorough, I think we might just leave. If we've got some questions on that, please feel free to ask, but otherwise let's just continue with the questions that we do have, because you've provided quite a thorough answer anticipating our questions. So I think we start up this end with Commissioner. Oh, which end are we at? Commissioner Bond. We're going to start at your end. If you have some questions.
Thank you. You've provided quite a lot of detail, so I've removed one of my questions that I required answers for because you've done that. But can you just clarify for me, please? I haven't quite got my head completely around it, but can you help me understand why the operative district plan describes the riverine inundation level 1 area as low risk because of flood protection, but Environment Southland's newer assessment identifies this as medium to high risk? I know you've kind of spoken to that, but can you just kind of like just address that a little bit more for me so I can understand exactly what you meant when you said that?
Yeah, sure. So effectively, the flood banks adjoining the Otapuni stream were created after the 84 floods. So effectively, they were designed to prevent a similar event of that scale from occurring by effectively holding the stream in the banks. But effectively, all stop banks have got a design parameters they design them to. So effectively, if you get a flood that exceeds that, or there's defects, or even floods within the magnitude can still cause breakouts and you still have damage. So there's effectively still a residual risk, even though there's a flood bank. The risk does not disappear behind flood banks. There's still a residual risk that applies, particularly if there's a overtopping or a breach scenario, or high groundwater or localised flooding. You can actually get flooding in behind the banks too. So effectively, it's trying to recognise that there's still, although there's flood banks along the Otapuni stream, there is still a residual risk within the area identified in the planning maps.
Can I pick up a supplementary question just on the back of that? So, look, what I can't understand is why the operative district plan has it as a low risk, but then now it's Environment Southland saying a medium risk. And I know that we are not reviewing the natural hazard maps, right, as part of this process, but it'll really help my thinking, because when you talk about, well, it's in response to 1984, then I go, well, surely then there would have been input from Environment Southland into identifying it as a low risk. Like, what's changed, like, physically?
Yeah, so to be really clear, the medium risk, as outlined in the evidence, has come from the new National Policy Statement for Natural Hazards, which has only come operative in January this year.
Right.
Prior to that, it was we were relying on the Southern Regional Policy Statement, which used the word significant and therefore managing others. So with the matrix identified in that National Policy Statement, we've worked through the likelihood and severity of the potential consequences associated with natural hazard risk, and that matrix has indicated that it sits at a medium risk level.
Okay, that's really helpful. So it's not a change in physical environment, it's a change in the test being
Correct, a
applied.
change in national policy.
Yep, no, that's really helpful. Did you have anything further?
So this is along the same line. Is your concern that if more homes are built behind the flood banks, the chance of flooding may still be lower, but the consequences could be greater if overtopping or failure occurred?
Yes, so effectively the Environment Southland's position is effectively prevention is better than cure.
Yep.
So if we know that there is inundation that has occurred in the past, and there's some measures in place with flood banks, the preference is to not put more people in harm's way and put more private investment in residential dwellings into places that are no longer suitable. And from a regional hazard perspective, we are getting inquiries on a regular basis around insurance not being able to be collected for, or not being able to get insurance for dwellings in flood-prone locations. So effectively, the less exposure there is, the less risk there is to private investment in those places. So seeking to reduce the potential risk down the track before it establishes, and then we have to try and manage it once it's in.
Your original submission covered off a whole lot of matters, but essentially now just clarifying that your focus is on the flood-prone area in the Te Tweed Otapuni Creek area is the remaining issue?
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, we're supportive of the plan change to intensify the residential zone. See no problems with that. I think it's a good opportunity, but yeah, just wanted to highlight the area around that flood zone, just to say that maybe it's not the best spot to put more houses in, and that's the area that I guess our focus is relied on for the expert evidence.
Are there any plans to change the flood mitigation that's in that area from Environment Southland?
So can you repeat that question, sorry?
Are there plans to change, improve, increase flood mitigation in that area?
At this stage, Environment Southland's in the process of reviewing existing capacity within the network. So there's been some work done on the Waihopai already, and then there's future work to occur across the Otapuni and Kingsville, just to understand what the existing protection is with the new models and the new information that becomes available. We've had regional LiDAR and bathymetry, which is helping provide a really detailed three-dimensional model of flood capacity within the networks. And there's a power of work occurring across all of Southland and the Mataura, Ariti, Aparima and Waiau to assist with flood understanding and understanding the flood dynamics and return levels, and therefore the scale of banks associated with what's about to help manage that risk and what return levels look like, and therefore levels of service and investment moving forward, knowing that there's a huge amount of flood banks across Southland, and the return periods and prioritisation around where investment is needed is going to be one of those things that we need to keep an eye on moving forward as a region. So in short, no, nothing at this stage. It's more investigation looking at what the potential capacity is, return periods and any defects before we look at, therefore, further investment. But even if there was further investment, there's still a residual risk behind any flood banks that occur as well.
So just on scope, do you accept that even though the national policy statement for national hazards applies, but we still have to work within the scope of Plan Change 2 and the submissions?
Yes, understand that. And my reading of the legal counsel submission was that there was scope potentially brought in through the submission on this, that you could get a wee bit of opportunity to bring in the national policy statement for natural hazard aspects, but happy to be corrected on that too.
So is Environment Southland's position then seeking the removal of the Te Tweed area from Plan Change 2 and giving a scope to adopt a targeted rural response for that area?
I guess initially looking at this plan change, we thought, we'll just move the lines so the intensification area is outside of that natural hazard zone. So existing status quo would remain. People can still subdivide within the existing rural frameworks that exist, and there's also Section 10 of the Resource Management Act allows for existing use rights. So if you have a house there in the moment, you can get rid of the old house and build a new one. There's nothing. We're not seeking to remove any of those rules through our submission. Those rules exist, and those rights exist through the Act. It was more the opportunity for intensification that is the primary point that Environment Southland's seeking to not allow any further intensification and getting more assets and people in potential harm's way.
Thanks for the clarity.
Yep, so I'm just thinking about how I frame up a question on the new rule framework that's been proposed, or the new rule. So what I've heard is that you've got some concerns with that, and the concerns are whether or not the restricted discretionary. I just want to sum it up in the 3 points that you made so that we really clearly understand them, and that started with the Natural Hazard Policy 8, restricted discretionary status might not give effect to that avoidance policy. That was the first one.
That's correct.
Second was really connecting subdivision to the point of development to reduce uncertainty when people are applying for consents.
Correct.
And so I understand. What was the third?
The third one was around recommending some guidance. So if that restricted discretionary rule is to be retained with a matter of discretion being natural hazard risk, just what that looks like in practice of if you're an applicant looking to put a house on an existing lot, do you have to go and spend $10,000 getting a natural hazard assessment to then get that done and go, hold on, it's not suitable, and you go apply for your resource consent and down the track you get a no? Is there a way that you can structure the rules in a way that cuts that risk of future developer ending up in that space down the path in a consenting framework where they've spent the money, gone through the consenting process, uncertainty is realised and decision is not issued? The way you craft the rules potentially could carve out that risk through a different and manage it slightly differently, that it's a non-complying, so there's a bit of a trigger at the front end, or trying to weed out anything that's not going to get through before they get down to the path of someone getting grumpy at council because they haven't got their consent.
No, got it. That's great.
So it's more of a practical implication of how does it play out for applicant on the ground, working through that, what thresholds and what evidence would be required, and whether they'd get through or whether they wouldn't, and how do we, through the planning framework, make sure
it clear now.
Yeah, make it clear now so that everybody knows what success looks like.
Great, thank you. Before you step away, I just want to take the opportunity to check whether our reporting officer or legal counsel want to, if they've got sufficient clarity on that, or whether they need a question through the chair to gain any further clarity on that response.
I'm quite clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. So as ES, I take it from your answer there, Mr. Roy, seeking non-complying activity status for wherever natural hazards are engaged.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, effectively probably just remaining the status quo is probably the best we could probably hope for. I don't know whether there would probably be scope to go non-compliant, maybe, I don't know, there might be a scope question there around whether there's enough latitude in the rule framework. I don't want to pull on one thread of the rule framework and unknit a whole bunch of policy development to get to that space, but I guess the remaining the status quo or carving the flood zone out of the 1A plan change might be the best approach. Then they've got the status quo remains, there's existing use rights prevail, and then I guess you still have that nice tidy linkage of the existing rule framework giving effect to that natural hazard policy that I outlined in that first point around natural hazard policy 8.
Great, thank you for answering. Is there any further questions?
Yes, there is one, sorry. Thank you. I understood from your answers to the panel earlier, though, that ES support the amendment that Ms Spalding recommended on 12 May to not increase the density in the flood overlay area, and that was a change made to the recommendation that you indicated you support that amendment.
Yes, in the sense that, not intensify that zone, so that's along the same lines of, not putting more people in harm's way.
By saying that you support that amendment, you're now talking about another way is to carve the flood zone out of the plan change, but I took it from your earlier answer that ES is comfortable if the area of the 1A zone within the flood overlay is not intensified. That addresses your concerns, doesn't it?
Yeah. Good.
I ask is it's just a major difference between then carving out the area from the 1A zone entirely.
Yeah, certainly. So I guess if in my view, if the existing drafting is to remain, then I think there's the policy question, the trigger point question, and then the guidance piece that probably need a bit wrapped round, or the other solution to the problem potentially is removing the zone from. So there's probably two solutions to the key concerns that I'm raising in the evidence. So one is, if it remains, there's probably a bit more to wrap around it. Or the other solution is potentially remove it and remain status quo.
Okay, thank you. And look, thank you, all three of you, for being open to ask and answer questions. It's quite helpful if we can do that here to make sure that it's actually quite efficient in how we move forward. Thank you for that. Now, I'll give you the opportunity just to, if you've got any final comments that you'd like to make, you're very welcome.
Nothing, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for providing your submission, your written materials, and also for turning up and answering our questions. Really appreciate it.
Whereas I have circulated it to the hearing administrator, to the notes that I read off. So,
thank you. Okay, wonderful. So now we'll turn to the final council response. We invite you now to share with us anything that has changed, needs some clarification, or needs to be addressed before we make our decisions, and whether or not we need to delve into anything a little bit deeper. Anything that you need to direct us to would be really helpful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. There's just a couple of matters that have been raised today that I'd like to respond to, and then I'll hand to Ms Spalding, who would like the opportunity to do so similarly. So, in terms of matters raised today, the first thing I wanted to just briefly respond to and address you on is when Kaingaora was submitting, and in particular the submission that was made by Ms Beneke about the glazing rule, and I did ask her that question. She asked that that rule be deleted, the 20% glazing rule, and that an effects-based approach be substituted. And in response to that, I understand what she was saying is that glazing be a matter of discretion rather than a 20% rule. We don't support that, for the reason being that to have a matter of discretion, it has to be tied to the need for consent, and then that puts the duty on any person to apply for a consent and then have the amount of glazing assessed and evaluated and a decision made, and rights of appeal and objection and so on. It's very complicated, costly and onerous on people, putting everyone through a consent to then trigger an assessment of glazing. Our approach is it's far more simple to have a standard that 20% is the design expectation, and that everyone can design to achieve that and be permitted. To make it discretionary is in our view a backward step and very costly and onerous. The panel obviously need to evaluate whether 20% is the right number, and you've heard from Council's urban designer who does support that, and I submit to you should put material weight on his advice. He is the only urban designer who's given expert evidence to you, so it should attract significant weight as to the reasons he's given to you as to why 20% is an appropriate figure in these circumstances. The only other slightly legal related issue is that Marcus Roy just raised, and I was trying to clarify with him that I understood he accepted Ms Spalding's recommended alteration to not increase the density within the flood hazard overlay, but he's raising the possible inconsistency with Natural Hazard Policy 8. And I think somebody raised that those provisions aren't in scope, and I support that. I don't think you can alter Policy 8, and I'm not suggesting you do. But the Council's position's not inconsistent with that. Ms Spalding's recommendation is simply that in that hazard overlay area, the density is not increased from the status quo. So we just simply have the status quo in that area. So there's no intention or outcome to increase natural hazard risk in that area. There is no inconsistency with that policy in my submission. So it's not actually a problem that needs fixing. Mr Roy sought some degree of guidance from Invercargill City Council for people applying for consents, and referring to trigger points about subdivision and land use. Ultimately, the council can put out what guidance it likes, but it is governed ultimately by what people apply for. And if someone applies for a subdivision and says, I don't want a land use consent, the council's hands are tied. So we can't necessarily force people to trigger a consent if they don't want one. So I think while it's a practical concern, it's not one that the plan can necessarily respond to or solve in my submission. And the final matter that Mr Roy raised was around structure. You heard my exchange with him about he did support, or ES support the amendment Ms Spalding has raised, but then introduced an alternative of removing those areas entirely from the residential 1A zone and carving that out. We don't really support that. It's not necessary. Ms Spalding has recommended to you an appropriate response to deal with the natural hazard risk that's been recently identified by ES. I will ask Ms Spalding to confirm to you that is her recommendation, because Mr Roy changed the hazard classification in his evidence from medium to high just to medium. Had the opportunity to ask Ms Spalding whether that alters anything in her opinion, but I will ask her to address that. I don't think it does, but we just need to confirm that. Those are the matters I wanted to raise in reply. Thank you. I think there's a high degree of support for the plan change. There's a lot of submissions and support, so I think it's very meritorious and ask that you approve it. Thank you.
And Ms Spalding.
I'll start with the natural hazards issues, just because that's fresh in mind. So I've just been looking at the subdivision objectives and policies and framework there, because I think from my hearing of what Mr Roy raised as his first issue was that there could be some degree of conflict with the subdivision. In the subdivision chapter, we've also got a policy 6, which relates to natural hazards, and it says to restrict subdivision in hazard-prone areas and ensure that each new allotment contains a hazard-free building site. So I think with that policy in place, there's probably unlikely to be conflict between those subdivision provisions and the new rule framework proposed. And in the subdivision rules, there's also a matter of discretion which relates to natural hazards. So I don't think there is too much risk of the subdivision occurring prior to a development without consideration of natural hazards. Oh, and also just confirming my recommendation change to the medium risk.
Okay. So, look, I just have one final question, but it's the legal question, which is just in your evidence, you outlaid the statutory framework that we need to give effect to, which is paragraph 9. And I just want, now that we've come to the end of hearing evidence, I just wanted to check whether legal counsel thinks that we have adequately addressed the statutory framework that you've outlaid there. Those are the matters that we must give effect to, have regard to and take into account. Has that been adequately addressed through this process? Either Section 32 report, 42, and evidence and responses so far.
Yes, thank you. I have no concerns that you're not adequately turning your mind to relevant matters. You do need to do so, of course, as we've mentioned a couple of times in opening, within the scope of submissions. So submitters have brought to you issues of relevance to them, and including the written submissions, which you've obviously already read. And in that framework, yes, you need to give effect to the higher order documents to the extent you can. And particularly the natural hazards one is a great example where Ms Spalding has responded and attempted to address the natural hazard risk that's been brought to the hearing in an appropriate way within the framework of the submissions and this plan change. So I'm not raising any concerns that you're not relevantly addressing the key considerations.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for providing your oral reply today. I just want to check in to see, in terms of a written right of reply, do you have an intention to do that, and if so, how much time frame is required?
Thank you for asking that. The only thing the team or Ms Spalding really wants to convey to you is the final set of recommended provisions, and she wants to do a consistency check around the point on the RD rules and just cast her eye through those in light of what she's heard today. So I would recommend that you just allow her time to submit a recommended set of provisions to you for your deliberations. I'll ask now, how long do you think you need for that?
I think I could do that by Friday.
Oh,
yeah.
Super quick. Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
With that, that concludes the council's case, and that's all we want to present to you, I think. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, before we adjourn, I just will check if there's any other final procedural matters or anything that's arisen during the course of the hearing today that we need to be aware of. Nope. Great. Well, then we'll just take this opportunity again to thank all of the submitters and council staff and experts and legal counsel and everybody who has come along and assisted us today. The panel will deliberate. We will adjourn to deliberate after the hearing. And if we consider that there needs to be any further information, then we will issue that through formal directions. But before adjourning, I will close with a karakia. And this is a karakia that is new to me, which is always nice. So, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana. Hei hua rahi mā tātou e te ranginei. Araha atu, araha mai, tātou i a tātou katoa, huiei, tā ki ei. So once again, thank you all very much, and the hearing is adjourned. Well, it wasn't